board a ship as World War II drew to a close. The future century has to be shaped by these two countries. Now, I'm not sure we are fully cognizant of it yet. I'm absolutely sure much of America isn't cognizant of that fact yet, but it is upon us. As we speak, the data will come out in a few weeks or a few months. India will have overtaken Germany to be the fourth largest economy. That just leaves Japan and China. A lot needs to get sorted out, and let us not even underestimate that even this whirlwind visit that the Indian Prime Minister is doing in Washington right now is not going to be a stepping stone in that finality or wherever we go. Well, it is. It always tends to be us here in television studios looking for great impacts and major deliverables. Let's open up those conversations on what is possible and what is not possible amongst a lot of hoopla, because the present moment seems to be everybody wants to discuss tariffs. Now, here's a fact check. In the India-US trade relationship, which is worth about $100 billion a year, India profits $50 billion. So that's a trade deficit for the Americans. Compare that to the trade deficit America has with China, which is nearer to $300 billion. India runs a trade deficit to China of $100 billion. So global trade is going to be a conversation. You've heard a lot about reciprocal tariffs. Well, I'm told that in this conversation between Prime Minister Modi and the US President Donald Trump, which is about to take place, India is going to be cutting some of those tariffs. In the run-up to the meeting, the US President has been talking about imposing reciprocal tariffs and pointing out that India has some of the largest tariffs, especially in things like automobiles, where we charge 25% duties. And in some cases, for fully assembled automobiles, that can even range to 100% depending on port of origin. Let me open up this conversation to have a larger perspective on all sides. On the broadcast with me, sitting in Washington, is Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor. He's with us. Adit Kataria from the Indic Society is joining us. Raymond Vickery, former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce, is with us. Jordan Cope is with us. Rick Russo joining us on the broadcast as well, and General Jeet Dwivedi on the broadcast. Let me pick this up with Mr. Vickery. Mr. Vickery, since the topic of the moment is tariff. Now, are we in a process of negotiating, and this is how Donald Trump plays it out, or do you really expect a serious tariff war with countries like India?
Well, thanks very much for having me. And I would say at the outset, I agree wholeheartedly that these two great democracies must cooperate to preserve democracies within their own countries and to cooperate to build peace and prosperity throughout the world, or else there's very little hope that any of the major issues will be solved. When it comes to tariffs, it is plain that President Trump is a business person coming from the real estate development area. In that regard, he's already shown in regard to Canada and Mexico that he will take a negotiating position which is extreme and then come down from that to get to where he thinks that he can say, I've had a victory for himself and for the United States. This is a style of dealing with other countries which we haven't experienced for a while, at least not since before the Great Depression. It remains to be seen whether it can be contained. The problem is miscalculation. Just in terms of a nuclear war, you can have the same thing when people are making all kinds of threats about tariffs, even though they're only intended for them to be leverage. Under the present circumstances, I think the most likely immediate outcome is really no immediate outcome. India has already taken steps to placate President Trump by announcing lowering of tariffs in several areas. It's placated him on immigration by saying we'll take back illegal immigrants. And today, President Trump said, well, nothing is really going to happen until April the 2nd, after I get a report from my people April 1st. Well, there's a lot of now and then. I do think that India and the U.S. are going to have to move forward on the trade front, the tariff front. Last time in Trump 1.0, there was almost reached an agreement which would have been some sort of framework for lowering tariffs and having some, although not exactly, a free trade agreement. I think that there'll be some sort of announcement about those negotiations today, along with announcements on Harley Davidson motorcycles,
Yep.
almonds, pecans, and so forth. And then the can will be kicked down the road to see where it really comes out.
Okay, all right. You mentioned Harley Davidson, and this is been a particular point for Donald Trump. He's mentioned it when he was president for the first time as well. He's mentioned it again. So for sure, we are expecting that in a press conference, one of the takeaways is going to be tariffs that deal with the vehicular class in which Harley Davidson exports to India. That's going to happen for sure. We're going to talk about something on nuclear energy for sure. Maybe modular reactors. India is already mulling this long pending civil nuclear liability clause that's been an issue since about the time that I began journalism. So it's been a few decades since we've been discussing them, since the historic, of course, deal which happened under Bush and Manmohan Singh. So that's a conversation there. Technology transfer, India placing defense orders, probably for sure. And that's going to be what Donald Trump says, that all right, I've delivered so many jobs because these many billions of dollars of orders Modi is giving me. So let me rope in Ambassador Kapoor for a different perspective. Now, Ambassador Kapoor, let me just jog our memory back, not too far back. Okay, let's go 6 months ago. Earlier, the issues were that all right, the biggest issue seems to be that the Indian consulates in the US are being attacked by Khalistanis, that there are almost people who are threatening the integrity of the Indian state are moving around, one would say complicitly. There is a massive conversation with Canada going on, which seems it's happening with American support. There is a particular individual on the loose by the name of George Soros. A lawsuit, in fact, charge sheet has been filed against a major Indian conglomerate for alleged bribery allegations in India. So there were a series of issues, all right, and now there are different series of issues. We're talking about migration, immigrant, planes coming back, handcuffs. We are talking about trade. How do you compare the two sets, sir?
Well, I think that the relations between the two countries are far more significant in terms of the substantive issues, in terms of the substantial progress which is being made. These are not the hardcore central issues for relations between the two countries. Now, people coming back, illegal immigrants in America, well, they have to come back. They have to be sent back. There is no two views on that. But about the K issue, the Khalistan issue, I think there will be a change of track. Because what I see with the current administration is that they are taking a lot of the issues which are very central to the existence and future of America very seriously. The Breaking America forces, which were getting a lot of, free sort of sway in many areas, like the wokes, having a lot of say in the policies, like the Islamic jihadis, like the Khalistani terrorists roaming around freely in the US, like, so many other aspects of daily life, like the universities being disrupted. So all those areas are slowly being brought back into some sort of rational functioning. And even in the issue of Khalistani terrorists, now I expect some significant progress to be made, in the sense that both the countries will look at each other's concerns a little more seriously, because the breaking US forces are overlapping quite a lot with the breaking India forces. Now, for the two countries to focus on science and technology, on defense areas, on space areas, on so many other positive areas where we have had a lot of discussions on military, exercises, on the threats which are facing both the big threats which are facing us, which are facing the world, like the jihadi terrorism, like Chinese aggressive stance in so many parts of the world. So to get the focus back onto those big areas is very, very
Okay.
important. I think this visit will achieve that refocus of both the countries and a discussion in real earnest between our two countries, and
Yeah. So
then move forward.
Yeah, so with all due respect, Ambassador Kapoor, yeah, we can't assume that relations between countries that should seem obvious don't go sour. The India-Canada relationship is a very vivid example of how things go really, really badly. To the best of my knowledge, we don't have ambassadors in each other's countries, believe it or not. And that's been the case for several months. It's a serious issue. So, General Dwivedi, let me put the same question to you before I rope in Mr. Calamel and Jordan and Adit. So, the issues we were discussing, and I sit with you on a regular basis, it was about how is it that Pannu is roaming around? How is it that Indian consulate staff are being attacked in North America with impunity? It seemed with support. It seemed that there was a deep state, willing to hold a knife on India's neck. We saw the George Soros has been a major point of conversation in local politics here in India, and he got a US Presidential Medal of Freedom. What happened in the New York court against the Adanis, and we all know that wasn't a target at the Adanis, that was a target to Modi. And George Soros has been publicly clear on this. So the issues were there, but they were different. There are new issues now. What do you make of the comparison?
Well, Rishabh, first and foremost, I like to put in perspective that India and US relations are strategic in nature because they are just not bilateral. They have an impact on how the globe is shaping, and therefore I think they are deep rooted. Second point is we need to look at the strategic convergence between India and America. There are no major differences as far as how we see the globe and how we see the regions. In fact, India has a very great role as far as America is concerned in Indo-Pacific, and that's a real area which America is looking at to shape the new order. And secondly, China factor, we both are on the same page. Only thing that we share border with China, whereas America only shares water borders, if at all, on the Western Pacific. Now, coming to these issues which you raised, I think were not the critical issues. Yes, they were irritants, but if you look at American policies, whether it is Democrat or Republican, there is a bipartisan approach to India. Yes, these issues are there, but I am sure that once now they'll get ironed out and realigned, because as Mr. Trump has just taken over, and it is within 30 days our Prime Minister is having conversation or deep conversation with President Trump. I think these issues gradually will get sidelined, and the real issues that we are looking at between the partnership of two democracies, of the two countries which have a significant, I would say, influence on the global polity, these will get realigned. And my last word is that defense is a very important factor amongst the relationship between the two countries. And defense.
Yes. So I'm going to come and pick that thought with you specifically, but let me get Adit in on this. So Adit, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, the arc of history is very long, but it bends towards justice. So the arc of history of Indian strategic relations, as I began by saying, that this century, whether the Indians realize it or the Americans realize it or not, is going to be shaped by the Indians and Americans. All right. This is where the world stands. But let us not assume that the arc of history hasn't got jittered a bit in the past few months. For 5 years, India and China had a border standoff going on that was readily resolved. India has, in the recent past, sort of ramped up its commitment with BRICS. That's a major sore point for the Americans on multiple fronts. Things that should have seemed obvious, that China is the problem, suddenly we had to make peace with the Chinese because we couldn't understand why the Americans were hosting the Khalistanis on their soil. So things were a bit off. I can tell you probably the worst I've seen in several years. Are those things now done, right? Do we come up with the more practical issues?
I think towards the latter half of the Biden administration, India was India had its arms completely open to them, whereas the Biden administration completely took them for granted, and I would go to the extent to say that they abused that relationship by all of the all of the fallacies that they played with, whether it be the Adani, whether it be the Khalistani elements sitting in the United States, and they used them against India just like clickbait. So I think from that perspective, that trust deficit is not there with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is basically, you get what you get what you see, kind of a thing. There is no sort of political correctness. He's not playing any sort of charades. Which is why the US-India relations, even now, when you see them developing, India's gone ahead with a much more open arms. They've readily said that, we are willing to consider tariff negotiations on, number of domains, whether it be agriculture, whether it be electronics, whether it be even surgical equipment, etc., and including Harley Davidson and Tesla as well, as I'm led to believe. So, from that perspective, I think the trade tariffs, MAGA, the sort of electorate of Donald Trump will get exactly what he has promised to them. The tariff reciprocal relationships will continue to happen, and as a consequence, what Donald Trump will also get from India, what he will be able to extract out of India, being one of the BRICS country where he has a lot of problems with the sort of BRICS economy. And he's called India sort of a abuser of trade in the past. Mm-hmm. He will be able to supply weapons. He will be able to get sort of cut out trade deals on the weapon side of things, on the defense side of things.
Okay.
So he will be able to go back to his electorate and say that this is what we've promised, and we are creating more American jobs as a consequence of that.
For people watching the broadcast, in reasonable living memory, when George Bush was US President and Manmohan Singh was the Indian Prime Minister, something called the Civil Nuclear Agreement was signed, and it was considered historic. It didn't achieve anything. So there's no reactor that's been built in India in these nearly 20 years. But what it did signify that a US President went out of his way to speak to the IAEA, use his leverage, use the United States leverage to remove long-standing sanctions on India. And concordantly, an Indian Prime Minister almost saw his government collapse under his feet because it was a government put together by Communist Party support. It was that much of a risk here in India. So for my American guests and people watching in America, let me update you on what's happened in the past week, 10 days. A US military aircraft has landed in India carrying just over 100 illegal immigrants, deported back to India and in difficult circumstances with handcuffs and whatnot. The Indian side, under a lot of pressure from the opposition, has not gone kicking and screaming and complaining about America's tactics. We have said it's their laws, and if people have broken their laws, we have to go by what their procedures are, including the military aircraft and including the handcuffs. This is in India's parliament. So a very pragmatic position has been taken, even in domestic circumstances here in India. So let me get Jordan on that thought. So Jordan, this is the context of what we are having a conversation in. I want to situate this immediate conversation because the larger world issues, because Trump might be heading to Saudi Arabia on Ukraine. Who knows what's happening when he says the US has to play a role in Gaza. I'm going to come to those questions closer and dearer to you in just a second. But in the situation that we are in, where the first move of the Trump administration has been send back the illegal immigrants, if there is pragmatism coming from the other side, do you think that's going to be respected?
I think it will, and I think there will be some tough conversations to be had between Modi and Trump, but I also think there's tremendous potential. I think when it comes to matters of undocumented and illegal immigration, there are approximately 725,000 Indians of undocumented nature in the United States. And respecting one's borders is ultimately respecting diplomacy for each other's countries. And Donald Trump has prioritized very much so dealing with the problem of illegal immigration in the United States, 10.5 million illegal immigrants were added to the ultimate tally under Joe Biden's presidency. And so I think the United States and India both ultimately realize, though, the importance of one another. The US especially recognizes the importance of India, and I would like to draw your attention to the fact that India and Modi is actually the fourth foreign leader to be invited to DC under Trump's presidency, which has ultimately emphasized the importance of dealing with the China threat, which in part and parcel, I believe, is why Modi is being invited so upfrontly to Washington, D.C. And important to note that of all of the four foreign leaders to visit D.C. so far, two of them have been Middle East partners, and one of them has been Japan. And so Trump right now, especially with how he dealt with the standoff with Panama, which ultimately resulted in Panama removing itself from China's One Belt and One Road initiative, has ultimately paved a way for an understanding of dealing with the threat that is China abroad. And the United States ultimately realizes that. I think the US will also discuss some other tough matters, like we've mentioned before, such as the tariff situation in India, which some US government officials have condemned, but which India has ultimately been very accommodating on behalf ever since. And on top of that, just strengthening the economies between both, trying to encourage India to invest more in American energy. And as Adit mentioned earlier, perhaps getting America to ultimately open a Tesla factory in India, but not just a Tesla factory, perhaps also installing Starlink there. So there's so much opportunity and potential between the two countries.
Okay, so let me contextualize the 2 points that Jordan has made. Tesla, why isn't Elon Musk already in India? Well, the first reason it got stuck was because he wanted to bring in the cars that were being made in Shanghai into India, all right? So he wasn't setting up a gigafactory in India, he wanted to pull in the cars from Shanghai. That's where it first got stuck. In more recent times, and you can speculate this, it's gotten stuck over Starlink, because there might be Indian players who want to offer similar services, and they think that Elon will come in and sweep the market. So it's gotten stuck again. He was supposed to travel to India a few months ago. He deferred his visit. He is met with PM Modi with his family just a short while ago. So let's see if some movement happens on that front. Remember, he is now a part of the Trump administration, leading an important wing of the Trump administration, that is DOGE. Let me get Ariel Calamel into this conversation. Mr. Calamel, let me address the immediacy of what we are discussing first, before I take on the broader context of very serious global issues. For Donald Trump, it seems to be the immediate issues were electoral promises. I'm going to crack down on immigration, and I'm going to sort out tariffs, right? This is where we are, and there are other issues, of course, parallel. Now, when it comes to immigration, we've had the plane loads exiting, and India has received one of them without complaint, rather with reasoned, pragmatic understanding that if there are illegal people breaking the law in a different country, well, then so be it. The laws of those countries apply. On tariffs, we are coming back with pragmatism and saying, all right, we are willing to sort them out and work with you. Are those two things enough to get past the immediate situation so that we can start discussing China and Ukraine and the Middle East?
I honestly hope they would be. And your lead into the entire segment really underscores my belief as well, is that it's you look at the BRICS nations, with the exception of India, you put Russia, China, and those nations in there. You see the globe is developing and the world is developing along two different axes. And China, India and the United States need to work together in a collaborative manner that's going to improve the economies of both countries. That'll be mutually beneficial for both of them, and also pull away. And at the same time, it will hurt China. It will hurt the other countries, because if we look at it, India's in a really bad neighborhood, but India has they have unbelievable potential. They have a very strong economy. The base is there. Unfortunately, years ago, the decision was made to send a lot of manufacturing and strengthen ties with China instead of the world's largest democracy. We need to be working with China along multiple fronts. We need to get over these hurdles And the way that India has accepted and the immigration, the people that broke immigration laws has been completely different than you see from the reaction of other countries. And when I hear Trump use the words tariffs vis-a-vis other countries, it's more to address other issues that he's not happy with. And issues, it's soft power that is being thrown out there. And it doesn't just involve trade, it involves a multitude of issues.
Okay.
With India, I think it's more specific. And then once we get past certain hurdles, and Raymond did a great job of outlining some of those things, that this relationship has to move forward. Has to look back at the IMEC, the Indian, Middle East, European Economic Corridor, to decouple from the One Belt, One Road initiative that China's working on to strangle the economies of the world. So I think we need to foster that relationship as quickly as possible. And I think it's
Okay.
important for the democracy and the world.
Okay, so watch this space, because in a week from now we'll be hosting the who's who involved in the IMEC corridor, and we'll having that live conversation very, very shortly. But let me invite Rick Russo into this conversation. Rick, just to contextualize where the conversation was sitting when you joined, we had issues 6 months ago, and a lot of irritating issues, because a few months ago we were told that India's democracy, well, it's whatever we are a half a democracy in some democratic index that comes out from America. I was told that me as a journalist sitting in India, that our journalism standards are worse than Afghanistan from another index that comes out of America. There was a Khalistani issue, and you know what's happened with our relationship with Canada over that. It's not pleasant right now. There was an issue of a court case that had been filed in New York. Things weren't looking pretty. So issues are different now. It's migration, it's tariffs. But how have you seen how India has handled that flight of migrants that landed here a week ago?
Well, first, I mean, things were never as bad as it sometimes seemed in Delhi when you grab one of these negative reports and you think that's the majority perspective, right? At the same time all these things were coming out, India joined Combined Maritime Force Bahrain. We're talking about Indian ports being able to be U.S. Navy docking at Indian ports. We resolved a number of WTO disputes, and on the backs of the Biden administration announcing programs on domestic manufacturing and solar and chips, the White House was absolutely pushing American companies in those sectors to make those investments into India. So, let's not overthink how bad things were. We got a ledger. There's some dark side on the ledger and a lot of positive even during that period. It was a pretty good 4 years. I do think, the plane load, you got a difference, as I think you're kind of hinting at. The administration in India understands, the desire to have people that are here illegally going back. But the visuals of people in shackles coming out of a plane, I do hope today, when they've got quiet time at the White House, that, that Prime Minister Modi can press President Trump to make sure that when this happens, it's done in a more humane manner. And at the same time, get more clarity from the U.S. administration. Where are they going to go on technology and skilled worker visas as well? Because there's a big debate in the Trump camp. People closest to President Trump realize these skills are important for the American economy, but the base, they don't really agree with immigration of any stripe and from any nation there. So
so Rick, hold your thought. I want to pick your mind. So here in India, unpleasant. The shackles are unpleasant, but our external affairs minister stood up in Parliament and said, if it's U.S. law and the U.S. law mandates it, so be it. And that's respectful, at least, of the position. We've not gone kicking and screaming, despite a lot of opposition pressure here. You can well imagine what's happened. So yes, a chartered flight would have been better, but our position seems to be pragmatic, that if another flight were to come, we would accept it as pretty much inevitable. On tariffs, we seem to be striking a positive note. We are expecting some movement in announcements that are going to happen very, very shortly. There will be some opening up of tariffs from the Indian side. So are we striking the right chord in this first renewed meeting?
Yeah, the Modi camp has been engaging the Trump team pretty actively before the election, after the election, during the inauguration. They know where the United States head is at. And of course, India's exports to the United States are double that of the next largest country. So India has to work hard to make sure that the United States doesn't try to rupture the trade relations as they exist. And so I think taking steps that won't hurt the Indian economy to any meaningful way, but will open up the door for American exports and appease the things that President Trump has in mind. I think there's a narrow space for India to accommodate, achieve some wins, and at least keep the relationship on trade in an even keel. The bigger question, that hangs out right now, the White House administration officials have privately said that we may actually begin a process that Ray Vickery has written about and worked on many times over the years. Are we going to begin talking about something bigger, a trade agreement of some type, covering sectors or something wider? So I can't wait to see what all they pack in the joint statement.
Yeah,
today,
it's a difficult one. So we have a trade agreement which is now in the bag with the Aussies. It's stuck with the British, badly stuck, to the best of my information. So can it be done? So let me get Mr. Vickery back in. Mr. Vickery, on a pragmatic front, if in this meeting we can sort of have a pragmatic understanding on the illegal migrants being sent back, can make some headway on the tariffs, can we then move on to a larger arc of history, which is inevitable despite what goes up and goes down?
Well, I think you have to look at what you're designating as the larger arc of history. There seems to be implicit in what you're saying that these are two really different and separate things. You have economic issues and then you have political issues. The fact is that they are intimately connected. And India and the U.S. have to be able to move forward on both at the same time. But coming to the political issues, I think that it's not right just to say that the values part of the relationship is not that important, that the real importance is only can we protect our borders and free movement against the Chinese, for example. The fact is that democracies work together and have long-term relationships if they have similar kinds of values, and if they protect those values of democracy, rule of law, being able to see that human rights are important. Those are not just make-weight kinds of considerations in international relations, in my view. And I think that these are important. So I think that, yes, we can be more practical in terms of what happens on the commercial and economic side, the immigration side. And I would say on the immigration side, the real issue is not the 100 people who get off a plane who appear to be not being treated right. It's the 700,000 or so Indians and Indian Americans who are in the United States that have visa situations which are not entirely clear. They may have been students who were here who want to get a job and do it. They may be people who were H-1B and something's happened there. And to say that you're just going to treat all those people the same and get rid of them all, put them on planes and send them back, will be a major impediment in relationship.
Yes.
So the reality is you can't just look at this as a transaction here or a transaction there. A holistic approach has to be taken, and thank goodness there's enough goodwill on both sides, Republican and Democrat over here, and I think similarly on.
Yes, fundamentally correct. That's as fundamentally correct as a position you hear in all reasonableness. There is immense goodwill, for the better part of 2 decades. For if anybody is watching this conversation abroad, this is not a death to America country. This is a country that aspires to the same kind of American values, which is why you see so many Indians going to the US and being very, very successful through just sheer hard labor. There are going to be issues, there always will be. There are issues in any relationships, there are issues in family relationships, let alone complex geopolitical ones. So we accept those issues as they exist. It is inevitable that these two countries have to work together, whether we all realize it right now or not. I think most of us sort of now do. So now let me move a step forward with Ambassador Kapoor. Ambassador Kapoor, on the assumption that we are genuinely going in with an open conscience and an open mind, that all right, that Donald Trump has some immediate practical requirements. Migration, tariffs are some of one of them, and we want to go into them with an open mind, right? Our engagement is going to be a bit different than how Trudeau is responding or how the Europeans are responding. We're going to be far more open and not give him what he wants, but we'll negotiate hard, but we'll be reasonable, we'll be pragmatic. If we can do that, what's next?
Well, Rishabh, let me put it the other way around. When, two leaders of two very important countries meet, and I've had to deal with a lot of such meetings in the past when I was ambassador or secretary. What happens is not what is going wrong between the two countries if both the countries have a very positive relationship. The meetings start off with the positive aspects, with the important issues which are of great concern to both the countries. It only ends up with very small amount of time spent on discussions about the issues like illegal immigration, because those are issues which are to be handled by the Secretary here of Homeland Security and by the Home Minister separately, or by the External Affairs Minister in any other format of +2 ministerial visits, or by the Ambassador of India along with his counterparts in the other departments here. So it's not going to occupy any major time. The issues of tariff will be handled by the US Treasury, for example, or the other USTR trade representative. So those are issues which will be just mentioned in passing. There would have been a lot of discussion which would have already taken place on those issues at all the other levels. What will happen between Trump and Modi is what is their worldview, what is their view of the future of India and US relations to challenge the big ticket items, to challenge the bigger threats. So that is where the more important time and more important focus will be on during this meeting. So expect some good headlines.
Okay, so let's pick up where we left off. General Dwivedi, let's pick up where we left off. Okay, 4 years ago, the same US president, situation in the world was different. The US, remember, was still in Afghanistan. There was no war in the Ukraine. The focus was, we had a very serious border standoff that had just sort of culminated. We had a huge issue going on in Taiwan. We were, let's face it, at the end of the Trump presidency, figuring out a massive virus pandemic, which even today, we don't know how it started, even though we suspect it began in a lab in Wuhan. So the world was a little bit different. Now there's a same two individuals are sitting down. How do they absorb the slightly different scenario that we are 4 or 5 years later?
Well, Rishabh, when two countries which have the ability to influence the global politics and also influence the shapes and contours of new world order, I quite agree with the ambassador that they look at the issues from a larger perspective. They look at the issues from the prism of a geostrategic prism, which is more global in nature, rather than look at the issues which may be the peripheral. The point is that when we look at the larger issues, the issues are still sacrosanct because our threat perceptions are quite converging. Our strategic perceptions are almost the same. Yes, the world has changed, but the overall, if you see, the China is what it is where the Wuhan was there, not there, and I was defense attaché in China for quite some time and also put on the diplomatic hat. The issues which the leaders of the global stature address are rather strategic in nature, and the issues which are like the immigrants, like the tariffs, of course, tariff is a major issue for President Trump, they come as footnotes. So therefore, I think the major issues will be addressed as to how the two countries look at the globe, where are the areas of larger convergences, how the Indo-Pacific is going to be shaped, how the IMEC is going to come up. I think these are the issues which will take major amount of time. Yes, other issues.
Okay, after probably the first time ever, I'm going to humbly disagree with that perception, because I promise you in the press conference that is coming up, it will be about how many billions the Indians are investing in America, how many American jobs that's going to create, what we gave up on tariffs, whether Harley Davidsons become cheaper in India or not, and how many more migrants we are willing to happily take back. That will be a large part of the conversation. Of course, like I keep on referring, there is an arc of history which is bigger than all of us, is bigger than the moment, which is propelling us to a shared destiny. It is inevitable. We are all buyers into the fact, even though some people may be more reticent in the given. So let me ask you a different question, General Dwivedi. On the very practical defense front, where India's primary defense supplier still remains Russia, we want and are already procuring US arms. We have the howitzers, we have the choppers coming. I know we have the UAVs coming. Jet engines, aircraft haven't happened yet. Do you expect a breakthrough?
Well, Vijay, firstly, I'd like to clarify that when I was discussing geostrategy, I was not putting the geoeconomics on back further.
Enough.
They'll be going side by side. Now, coming to the defense, over the last about 10 years, there have been a distinct shift in India's purchasing its defense equipment and reducing its dependency from Russia. Because about 10 years back, 70% of the equipment was coming from Russia. Today, that has come down to 40%. And if you see the economics part of the defense procurement, for last 15 years, we have procured $20 billion of equipment from America. And that doesn't come only buyer-seller relation. There have been a lot of movement forward in cooperating, co-manufacturing, and also shifting certain production lines. So I will quite categorically say that there will be definitely much more movement forward in the defense equipment. Especially, we are looking at big ticket purchases, the fighter jets, because right now in Bangalore, both F-35 and Su-57 were on display right in the air. I think we are going to make some decisions. We have to purchase some more equipment like aircrafts, C-17, C-130, howitzers are there, striker vehicles are there. All these things are very much, I think, on the inventory.
Okay.
And
so
some of these things will fructify.
Yeah, so for sure expect a big ticket announcement here. I don't think this meeting's opportunity will be wasted without having a big ticket announcement. And oftentimes in bilateral meetings, we in the press keep fishing for big ticket announcements because what do we make headlines out of, right? In real sense, you can sometimes smell the moment. This is one of them. There's going to be something big coming out of this. It won't be a damn squib saying, oh, we met and we shared coffee and we shared our worldviews and we all left. There's going to be something coming out of this. Before I get Adit back in, let me get Rick into this conversation. Rick, there are pathfinders, and so a pathfinder is required in resetting whatever this India-US relationship is under the Trump presidency. Something is going to happen for sure in the next few minutes, which will be important enough, or at least a takeaway for both sides. If we achieve that, then can we move on to figure out what's happening in Ukraine? What do we do with Gaza? What do we do with climate change and whatnot?
That certainly is a big question. I think overall, the United States and India still have different approaches on a lot of global issues. The one that we have a lot more complementarity is the agreement that China is the major strategic threat that we face across the Indo-Pacific. So climate change, no. India, I think, is a lot more kind of behind the science behind that than I think the U.S. administration is going to be. So that's going to be tricky. I don't think that President Trump is going to look for India's guidance on Gaza as well as Russia, Ukraine. They're going to kind of move at their own pace. China still remains the big strategic factor that I think you're going to see a lot of complementarity. They're talking about, amending and signing.
Okay, Rick, sorry to interrupt you. Just taking in live shots from the White House. That is the arrival of the Indian Prime Minister for the meeting with US President Donald J. Trump. That meeting will continue for just over 60 minutes, maybe longer, after which we are expecting a press briefing by both the President and the Prime Minister. You get to see live shots on your screens as this meeting begins. There have been meetings that have already happened. PM Modi has met with Tulsi Gabbard. He's met with Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy. But this is, of course, the main one. It's not only the formal one. This is where the hard tickets get put. A lot of preparation, I can tell you, has already gone into this. As PM Modi enters the White House, not for the first time, and certainly not for the last. He's going to be there again, perhaps for a longer visit. This is an important one because it is sort of getting, I would say, I won't use the word formalities, but practicalities out of the way on what is the Trump agenda. And I promise you, for anybody watching this abroad, the Indian side is going with a very pragmatic approach. We are not going with the approach that we want to push back or be difficult. If the demand is reasonable, we are more than willing to accommodate it. But we will have our own demands. Rick, sorry I interrupted you. Finish your thought.
I was just saying that I think you're going to see less convergence on a lot of big global issues with Trump and Modi than what you saw, I think, with President Biden. But the two big ones, China, I was talking about, and the other one you referenced before is IMEC. I think those are the two global issues we're going to see a lot of complementarity and see the two leaders really kind of leaning in. But on climate and other things, either we're going to be on different paces or working independently, I think.
Okay, so Rick, let me pick your mind, because what we've heard so far, right, it seems that, we've heard about Greenland and Panama, and let's pull out of the WHO, which sort of puts UN in crisis, and probably cut back on funding in Ukraine, which I'm assuming is now inevitable, which sort of puts whether the Brits or the French and the others will be able to step up and replace the same, which sort of puts NATO in crisis. We haven't heard much about Taiwan and the Straits and Japan and the Indo-Pacific.
Well, Japan has already been, I think, relatively well featured in the administration, and the first foreign policy engagement the Trump administration had was the Quad meeting, ministers meeting that took place the day after inauguration. So, I suspect, as they didn't say it quite this clearly, but as they start to draw down engagement with Europe, the last time President Trump was in office, just like President Obama, just like President Biden, we recognize that the biggest threats the United States and India are going to face in the future come from the Indo-Pacific. So while they haven't maybe announced the other side, when you start talking about drawing down our relative military presence and heft in Europe, you got to believe that Indo-Pacific is going to be the place that they double down, because that was on President Trump's agenda last time around. May not have been stated quite so clearly yet, but when you see the Quad, when you see India, when you see Japan featured in early engagements, that seems to be the direction we're moving in.
Okay, so to put context to what Rick was referring to, when India's External Affairs Minister was at the inaugural, sitting front and center, the next day they had a Quad meeting of the External Affairs Ministers, or the ones to be appointed. So let me get Adit back in. Adit, I just want to take a leap back into history for a second to put context to our conversation. So we are looking at the last tariff war between the US and China under Donald Trump in his first presidency. There was supposed to be a meeting to be held when a last round of negotiations, so the deal-making meeting, was scheduled for the January of 2020. That meeting never happened. We all know why, because by the time that January ended in 2020, we knew that there was a pandemic which was coming our way from China. So here we are a few years later, a lot of water has sailed under the bridge. Have we reset it from that moment, or are we picking up from there?
No, I think we're certainly picking up from there. I mean, the bonhomie between the two leaders, we've seen it ever since, both were in power, including Narendra Modi going all the way to Texas, and then, in that famous rally, basically saying, "Aapki baar, Trump ki sarkar." So we know that, they both share a very pragmatic and a very friendly, very cordial relationship, and they will pick up from exactly where they left it off. The one thing that I see different with Trump 2.0 is the expeditation of various issues. I mean, the fact that, the moment he assumed power, you look at the way he sort of distinctly came out differently to sign all the executive orders, the sheer expedition of the irregular aliens from America back to their home countries. That goes to demonstrate that Trump has an agenda, and he's willing to go a mile to fulfill that agenda. Just picking up from one of the arguments that Rick actually made, that the inner circle of Trump, which is the Vivek Ramaswamy, the Elon Musks of the world, who understand the importance of the tier 1 or the H-1B visas, whereas the bottom layer of the Trump support do not. Today's rally was very, very outspoken from that perspective. Trump made he drew a parallel of how JSW invested $500 million in the dying steel industry in the United States, and as a consequence, increased the level of job creation as a consequence. So he understands the importance of the Indian intellect, the Indian skills.
Yes.
And thereby he is actually reaching out to his, core voter, the MAGA vote base, and saying that, the Indians are, different to the other irregular aliens that we have in the United States.
Yes,
which is why we are going to be accommodating
practicality
them.
on that, and for sure you're going to hear that statement. Like I said, you can easily mark my words. This is easily predictable that there are going to be conversations in that press meeting about Indian companies investing in the US. Indian companies, I can tell you, want to invest in the US. Right? It's not something that they're being forced to for strategic reasons. The US is a huge market. We potentially, from our investments in the US, can contribute to the US market and do what Americans would want everyone to do, is provide goods and services which do well in a liberal free market and turn a profit. Fair enough, that's how it's supposed to work. There is a trade imbalance of $50 billion. It's reasonable for the Americans to ask, listen, hang on. But it's reasonable for them to remember that the trade imbalance with the Chinese is $300 billion. So within reasonableness, we can find this. Okay, I just want to touch upon a few things before I lose the guests, because we're out of time. Jordan, let me come back to now the other bigger, what for sure is an elephant in every room that is discussing strategy and geopolitics, which is what now happens in Ukraine, what now happens in Gaza.
These are big questions to ask right now. I think in terms of Europe, Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of Defense, has made clear that European security is no longer a primary interest of ours to which we will be investing as much as we previously had. So that definitely leaves, I guess, a vacuum and a void as to how the Europeans will respond, surely and hopefully by subsidizing their own defense and subsidizing NATO to the degree which they previously pledged and have largely failed over the years to reach that threshold. It seems that Ukraine is willing to ultimately compromise on its borders for land swaps with Russia, and it seems that this has ultimately opened perhaps a pathway to a pragmatic and realistic solution regarding winding down the Ukraine and Russian conflict, at least for now. The big question for now is to what happens with Gaza is ultimately a bit of a mystery, and it's one where we need to read between the lines in terms of how Trump is negotiating. There's a author and a thinker at the Jerusalem Post who believes that Trump is ultimately banging on the ground to scare out the snakes. In other words, trying to get relevant regional actors to assume their fair share of the burden in helping resolve this conflict.
So let's pick on that for a second. So you're saying that means the Egyptians and the Jordanians in receiving refugees and opening up borders and providing help. But when he says he's going to have Americans come and run Gaza, what does that really mean? Is that again a negotiating position? What does that mean?
It's very likely a negotiating point to force these countries to realize that, one, America is not going to rebuild the Gaza Strip unless it has some sort of influence. America has helped rebuild Gaza time and time again. It's given $7 billion to UNRWA since 1950. But even more so in recent conflicts, it's given hundreds of million dollars, approximately $400 million since 2023. How I interpret this ultimately is Trump is just ultimately trying to jolt regional actors to realize that they can't continue a perpetuating cycle in which foreign aid comes in to Hamas leadership, which aspires for genocide against Israel and the Jewish people, and to realize that the Gazan citizens in there also need a voluntary way out, and that Egypt and Jordan and Lebanon, and even though Lebanon's not the focus of this, but all these countries for decades now have refused Palestinian refugees, and those whom have transcended into their borders.
All right, so let's take this a step further. All right, that's the immediate problem, but we've had this conversation before. The immediate problem comes from elsewhere, and I'm sure you'll tell me that if you want to look at troubles in Gaza, you have to look at Tehran. And then I can tell you, if you look at Tehran, you probably need to look at Beijing, because you have to follow the money trail where it's coming. So if that is the symptom of what is taking place and the real issues are coming from elsewhere, where does the Donald Trump administration fit in there?
Well, of course, the Trump administration has placed emphasis on restoring regional proxies of Iran and placing them back on the terrorist blacklist, such as the Houthis, who are now designated as a foreign terrorist organization. Trump, of course, has also sanctioned Iran. One big loophole that Trump hasn't quite addressed yet is Qatar, which has funded $2 billion to Hamas since 2012. is one of the greatest sponsors of regional terrorism. It funded Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Syria, whose Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani recently seized power. So Trump is making some good strides in combating terrorism financiers in the region. It really needs, however, to also address the Qatari threat, which the United States on both sides of the political aisle have coddled over the years and have ultimately increased and improved relations with, which I strongly disagree with.
Okay, so there's a complexity there. India-Qatari association was very unpleasant. Just a few months ago, 4 of our veterans had been put into Qatari jails, ironically of all things accused of spying for Israel. So let me get Ambassador Kapoor in. Ambassador Kapoor, in the Ukrainian question, to whatever settlement is coming our way, or to the question in Gaza, is it a consideration for us? Is it a talking point for us at all? Do we have any skin in the game, or or say on the table?
Well, I think we have a reasonably important role to play, because if we look at the Gaza situation, the IMEC corridor, if it gets active and active in the sense of it starts impacting the local economies of all the countries that it is passing through, the Israel-Palestine Gaza area would be one of those areas. So that could bring in a lot of jobs and employment and a lot of economic activity to that entire region. So from that perspective, the Indian role is there. India has been a very important partner of Israel. India has been a very important supporter of the Palestine cause earlier, before things went wrong in so many different ways. So in the Israel-Gaza conflict, India therefore has a very important role to play if it is asked to play that role. India is not a country which seeks out those roles, but when it is asked to come in and contribute its might, it does that very significantly. We have seen that in Cambodia. We have seen that in a lot of other countries.
Let's be reasonably realistic. All right. Now, if you want to be a great power, you're going to have to take on larger global responsibility. We are seeing India start down that road. 10 years ago, the biggest complaint was, and I've heard it, off the record many times, from people that, it's okay to talk a big game, but in the end, where are you going to actually put boots on the ground? And the answer for us was always nowhere. We're not going to put boots on the ground in Gaza. We're not going to put boots on the ground in Afghanistan. We're not going to put boots on the ground in Syria, Lebanon, or the Ukraine, one side or the other side. So how do we navigate this? The reality is, this is not a conversation that is happening where India is being asked to sit on the table to figure it out. We are probably happy with that for now, but these issues are going to come for us, and our opinion is going to be sought, and our intervention is going to be sought. What's happening in the anti-piracy campaigns? I've never seen so many Indian ships so far from our shores doing, anti-piracy operations mean that it's guns are blazing. Let's be practical. Let me welcome into the broadcast Ravi Karkara is joining us, Bharat Barai on the broadcast with us, Dr. Saturu Nagao on the broadcast, and General J.K. Bansal joining us. Dr. Bharat Barai, let me bring you in on a different note. There seems to be some sort of understanding that a very pragmatic reassociation has to happen on issues like migration and on tariffs, and we need to get them out of the way. What do you expect coming out of this conversation?
See, the issue of tariff and the issue of illegal migration, we knew that it was going to come up, and it is not just for India, it's for many other countries that it affects. Now, there are many aspects of relationship between India and USA, and these are two areas on which we don't have full concordance. For example, United States feels that there are more import duties, as we call it, which is another name for tariff, by India, and India needs to lower those tariffs and allow more US products to come. They did talk about Tesla cars, they did talk about Harley Davidson and many other things. So India will have to try to give in something, or they are going to face reciprocal tariff, because US president feels that we should have an even trade, and India has a $45.7 billion surplus in trade with USA 2022, 23, and 24. As far as illegal immigration is concerned, let me give you a different other perspective also. which unfortunately is not talked about. Yes, there are about 17,000 illegal Indians in detention, and Pew Research estimate that there are about 700,000 illegal Indian immigrants. But we forget that there are 5.5 million legal people of Indian origin, citizens, green card holders, H-1B visa holders, as well as student visa holders. And there are about 5 million people in India who hold long-term visa to come to United States. So we should not forget at the interest of 10.5 million law-abiding legal visa holders or residents or green card holders or citizens of Indian origin as far as USA is concerned, and not focus unduly on few thousand illegals who came. Now, yes, I would not like to see somebody handcuffed and deported out. There should be maybe a little better way to deport them out, but no country should allow illegals to come in their country, and United States is fully justified in trying to get these people out. And they are not just getting people of Indian origin out.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's estimated that there are about 11 million illegal immigrants living in USA.
No, Dr. Barai, as you know, as you and I well know, India also has an illegal immigration problem. We have serious concerns about illegal immigration from Myanmar, from Bangladesh and other places. We haven't cracked a formula on how to deal with it for sure. There's a lot of controversy which somehow becomes global controversy if we even try to document illegal immigration. We know what happened with the NRC and the CA in India. It became an international issue, believe it or not. But Dr. Barai, assuming that we have open mind on these issues and we can say, all right, we're going to work with the US on the tariffs and reducing the trade deficit. We're going to work on accepting more illegal immigrants back. What next?
Well, next we probably should see a big defense deal, because United States needs to export more top-of-the-notch equipment. And we know from the recent use of Israeli equipment that United States has probably top-of-the-line equipment. For example, there are 100 Israeli, mostly F-13 fighters that went over Iraq and bombed them, and Iraq could not shoot down in one of them. In fact, most of the Russian S-300 missiles, which were kept there for air defense, they were all knocked out. So we know that United States makes some of the top-notch defense equipment, and we need it. Our Air Force is very short of number of squadrons that are needed, almost 42 of them. So we could utilize the drones, we could utilize the fighter aircraft, we could utilize some of the submarines, though most of them are coming from France. We can have Apache helicopters, so we can have a lot of top-notch defense equipment that can be imported from USA, as well as co-manufactured like General Electric engines.
Yes.
As far as other trade is concerned, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, so all those things could be beneficial to India.
You know, it'll be odd if there is no conversation on artificial intelligence, given all the conversations that are happening. I promise you, Sam Altman was in India last week to hold meetings here just a few days after announcing that Operation Stargate, which is a $500 billion AI plan, supported between our definition of public-private partnership. But let me get Adrian Calamel back in. Adrian, assuming that the bilateral issues, and we see the big ticket defense agreement, and we see that we're going to buy the planes and the jet engines and the UAVs, and there's going to be significant reduction in Indian tariffs, we are going to invest more in the US, all excellent. Let's assume we get this done in the next hour and we set a really positive note. Having set the positive note, what's the agenda after that?
Well, the agenda after that is simply to build on this and continue to counter. Everybody's been talking about countering China. We can't just compartmentalize China. We have to understand that the Islamic Republic of Iran, Moscow, and Beijing all coordinate together. And so we have to have a holistic policy that's going to address all of them. So I would hope that the United States as well as India would get on a foreign policy page that looks at those actors as well, and then the actors that support them, the Qatars of the world, the Caracases, the Islamabads, and those type of countries. So from a foreign policy perspective, that's what I would hope would happen.
Have we lost focus on the war on terror in the past 10 years or so?
Well, I would say so. When you have the president saying that the Taliban are your counterterrorism partners in Afghanistan, I think not only have you lost it, you've lost the plot. So I think there's a grave concern, rightfully so. Hamza bin Laden is alive. He's not dead, as the CIA said back in 2019. So yeah, there is a gathering storm that I think people should absolutely be worried about. And I know that the CIA, if you look at Christopher Wray from the FBI, he was terrified at his briefings before he eventually left office.
Okay, so Adrian, give us a bigger picture to again contextualize whatever conversations are happening, because just in the last few months we've seen a dramatic turn of events in Syria. All right, there's a regime there that no longer exists. We've seen high drama in Lebanon for all sorts of intents and purposes. We don't see any culmination in Gaza anytime soon. What is actually going on? Because when we say trade is the future, IMEC requires the Abraham Accords to follow through. Where do those stand right now?
Well, where it stands and where the Trump administration stands and where the Middle East stands right now is the maximum pressure campaign is back in place. The sanctions are going to be enforced on the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic gave the green light to Hamas. They continue to support Hamas, supported Hezbollah, which has been defanged to a great degree. The Houthis are next on the list. So, and then you drain the foreign currency reserves, which will happen. The maximum pressure under the first campaign, Trump administration, was only from 2018 to 2020, drained them down to $4 billion in currency reserves. That's the money that pays the Houthis. That's the money that pays the Badr organization, PMF, all of the individuals, all of the groups that cause chaos in the region and then capitalize on it.
All right. So let me just take a last word on Jordan on this before I let him go, and then I'm going to open Mr. Karkara into this conversation as well. So Jordan, just contextualize this issue, because for people watching the broadcast, when we say IMEC, okay, IMEC means that the port of origin for transshipment and goods is in India, right? But then it has to go through Dubai, then over land, traversing almost all of Saudi Arabia. It will have to go through Jordan. It will have to then go through Israel, end up in the Haifa port, and then enter the Mediterranean. That's IMEC. For that to work, there have to be the Abraham Accords. Now, we were very close to this, maybe just a year and a half ago. Where are we now, Jordan Cope?
It's a big question that remains yet to be answered. Josh Hemmer from Newsweek, according to sources that he had in the US government, suspected that at the beginning of the Biden presidency and the end of the Trump presidency, we were approximately 3 to 4 months away from realizing peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which was ultimately disrupted by American policies that I would argue betrayed our Saudi Arabian ally, and then further postponed, even though American relations did get better over time, further postponed by the October 7th terrorist attacks by Hamas, by the Islamic Jihad, and by what many don't know, also the PFLP was also involved in those attacks. That created so much turmoil in the Middle East. It made it politically awkward for Saudi Arabia at the time to further commence with a deal. But hopefully we'll be
Jordan, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're expecting the press briefing to start very, very shortly. Quick word from Ravi Karkara. Mr. Karkara, what are you hoping to hear?
To hear a strong partnership on manufacturing. I mean, very much on Make in America, which is a very clear sentiment here. And what can we really learn from Make in India? I think Bharatji has also really advocated a lot for looking at this partnership, especially on the AI front. We're really looking at how AI becomes a very critical force. I think America, India, that's what Modi ji said in one of his interviews. And America, India's AI, and AI is driving the 5th industrial revolution.
Okay, so where's the confluence of interest, Ravi Karkara, since you know the expert on the subject, the data, India has got data, 1.4 billion of us generating data like heck. we can potentially build the data centers as well, but we don't have the hard infrastructure yet for the AI. How can we be players in this?
I think that's really coming in. If you look at all the partnerships that are coming through, really from the American investors, I think this is going to be one of the very high on the agenda. Data centers will need to be in a reliable location. And I think also data center that needs to be sustainable. This is my everyday work. And I think for us, the transfer, and this is what I think one of the speakers said, I think India, along with just supplying the AI skilled workforce, but for really India to develop its model and its core work around AI, we need the American technology in that partnership. The irony here is that there are many AI forces here also from the Indian descent, which I think is a great advantage for us to come together, because I think this partnership and the announcement, along with geopolitics and other areas that you talked about, I think AI-driven manufacturing research will drive the fifth industrial. We know that. So data center are going to be in the center of it. Okay. And also the whole controversy, just to conclude with DeepSeek, it has to be reliable, secure locations. And I think that's where the partnership of India and USA on AI is absolutely essential.
So I know it's arguable whether we are actually doing in India frontline LLM or artificial general intelligence research, where we are anywhere there yet, because on the face value of it, no. But then we have people like Arvind Srinivas building Perplexity. So the second you can argue that yes, they are converting this into real world use and creating billion-dollar companies, all dealing with AI. Let me get some images on our screens, ladies and gentlemen. Here you have it. That's the Modi-Trump meeting in progress on your screens over there. You can see the Indian delegations. You can see NSA Doval there, Ambassador Jaishankar there as well. The translators are there sitting at the back, and of course the US Secretary of State sitting as well. So that's the meeting that's happened. Yes, there's going to be a press briefing. A few words have been exchanged in front of the cameras. A closed-door briefing is underway, and yes, there will be a press briefing immediately after this. Let me get General Bansal into this conversation. General Bansal, we are almost for certain expecting a big-ticket defense deal, perhaps the first sale agreement in principle of fighter jets from the United States of America. India operates a fleet of Russian-made, French-made, and now Indian-made jets. No American jets in the Indian Air Force fleet so far. Do we expect them to be coming our way shortly?
Good morning. There has been a lot of discussion about the F-35 and Su-57 that India should go to, for which one there has been debates, and they both has got their own merits and demerits. The F-35 is definitely an offensive type of aircraft which can, while the Su-57 is a defensive type. Now, it is a very stealth type aircraft which is available, but its cost is very high. It is almost 60% more than the Su-57. That is one of the reasons that yes, and moreover, the technology transfer, whether they will agree for that or not, this is going on to be a very big thing. But as such, we are getting so many defense equipment.
Okay. So General Bansal, we got the howitzers. We are buying other armored carriers. We are buying UAVs. We've already got the choppers, all right? So it's inevitable, yes, fighter jets. The biggest issue, not necessarily the price, the biggest issue, as you mentioned, is technology transfer. India does not make a jet engine. It's the biggest concern for a major country, let alone a major defense purchaser. Do you expect progress on that front? Will we get technology transfer? Will GE come and make that jet engine in India?
We are expecting that. This was a deal made in 2023 itself, and between GE and our HAL. So that will come up. Why I was telling, because this was mentioned, I think, by Mr. Bharat, that we need 42 squadron and we are having only around 30. So there is a large number of and finance is required for everything. Definitely one has to keep in mind. And I was talking about that, yes, we are getting 31 MQ-9 Reaper drones, which is $3.3 billion deal.
Yes.
We are having these helicopters, Apache helicopters, we are having assault rifles, we are having howitzer, very light guns which are used in the mountain. So we are having the Globemaster carrier aircraft, we are having the the special aircraft, Herculean type, which can be as a special airlift. There's so many
Okay, so
defense
expect it
equipment.
very shortly. Expect a big ticket defense account announcement. I have on good authority that it is almost inevitable. It's going to happen. We're going to talk about big ticket announcements, not only of commercial investment by Indian firms into the US, perhaps in the steel industry and other places. We are going to see an announcement of a reduction in tariffs on various products, from Indian tariffs of US products being exported into India. For sure, we are going to see a defense announcement on some fact. Now, how big the deal will be, I promise you, money is not the problem. The problem is technology transfer. India mandates that a percentage of the aircraft after the first deliveries have to be not only jointly produced in India, but there has to be a certain percentage of technology transfer built into the contract. That's the sticking point. It's not like we don't like the aircraft, it's not like we don't want the aircraft, or it's not like we can't afford the aircraft. That's the problem. Okay, hold that thought. Let me get a different perspective from Dr. Nagao joining us on the broadcast. Dr. Nagao, thank you. And I know it's it'll be a very odd hour for you as well. If you are in Japan, if you're in the US, then it's an odd hour for us because it's 4 in the morning here in New Delhi as we're having this conversation. Let's shift focus to the Indo-Pacific, because the first meeting that was held after the Trump swearing in was a quad meeting of foreign ministers. Right now we are discussing tariffs, we are discussing migration. When do you expect the focus will be back on the Indo-Pacific?
It is interesting. President Trump chose 4 leaders met this month. First one is Israel, next one is Japan, third one Jordan, and fourth one now Modi, India. So this means that he focusing on Middle East and Indo-Pacific. So generally, the US president meets the British as a first foreign guest. But this time, it is not. He focusing on this area. So view from this, his strategy is clearly built in this process. Firstly, he tried to solve the problem in Middle East and Europe, and he want to relocate resources to the Indo-Pacific. So view from this order indicate that. So that's why this is a big picture President Trump focusing on. And this is a good chance for India, Japan, or other country in the Indo-Pacific.
So Dr. Nagao, from the UK, Nigel Farage of all people was invited to the Trump inaugural, and of course the British Prime Minister was not there. Yes, the Chinese president was invited. He sent a representative who was there. So there has going to be engagement. So Dr. Nagao, assuming that the priority number 1 and the conversation number 1 or the argument number 1 is going to be on tariffs with China. That's where the focus right now is. When does it come and shift to security issues, which we know are very real from where you and I are sitting?
Without solving issue in the Middle East and Europe, the United States cannot concentrate their resources to the Indo-Pacific to counter China. So that's why the trade war has already happened, and the President Trump is using 2 types of tariff: negotiable tariff and non-negotiable tariff. For example, when President Trump declared to impose tariff to the 3 countries, Canada, Mexico, and China, in this case, it looks like all of the 3 are one category of tariff, but it is not true, because tariff on Canada and tariff on Mexico are negotiable tariff, but tariff on China is non-negotiable. So that's why only the China's one is imposing now. And the other 2 imposing on Canada and Mexico still under negotiation. So tariff will impose any country in the world because America first for the President Trump. But at the same time, indeed, tariff on China is special, completely different. US need to win the competition with China. That's why this is a tool. This is a tool for battle.
Okay, so let's contextualize this. Ambassador Kapoor, let's now go back to the big elephant in the room in the Oval Office right now, because I know that might not be the immediacy of the conversation. But Donald Trump knows it, Narendra Modi for sure knows it, you and I know it, it's China. So the grand tariff war ain't going to happen with India, it's going to happen with the Chinese. The Chinese are already threatening to cut off pretty much the entire world's rare earth supplies. And then, of course, that's on the economic front. On the strategic and security front, Mr. Ambassador Kapoor, where do you see it going?
Well, I guess it is going to go in a very positive direction on all the fronts, including the economic front and the political front, because when two such leaders meet, the primary discussions take place on politics and geopolitics, then on the economy, then on the trade aspects, then on the military cooperation, then on geostrategic cooperation, and then on the other issues. So I think there's a lot of common grounds between India and US. Also, if you realize, Rishabh, the Indian economy is the primary driver of the global economy currently. It's growing at the fastest pace for any country. And the Indian market is expanding at a massive rate. And the Indian defense market is also a very important market for the Americans. So for the Americans to also look at the other aspects of economy is very important. In terms of geopolitics and geostrategy, the greatest threats which the Americans are facing, of course, is from China and from global terrorism and jihadi terrorism. And that is the same threat which India is facing. So there's a lot of convergence on that also. Going to be very important issues. The collaboration between India and the US now needs to be increased on multiple fronts.
Okay.
And instead of just 2+2 ministerial meetings, probably the next step will be, 4+4 or even 6+6 ministerial meetings between the India and the US.
So, but are we further away, or because China has its own problems right now? Okay, very serious domestic, economic, populational, other problems. For whatever little bit of information leaks out, but are we closer to a crisis in Taiwan, closer to a crisis between Japan and can we listen in? Can we listen in to what's being said?
मैं कह सकता हूं कि राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप के पहले 4 वर्ष का मेरा जो अनुभव था, जो गर्मजोशी थी, जो उत्साह था, जो विश्वास था, वही गर्मजोशी, वही उत्साह, वही विश्वास के साथ हम फिर एक बार साथ मिलकर के आगे बढ़ेंगे।
Last year, the people of India gave me the opportunity to serve them for the 3rd consecutive time, and it has happened in the history of India in the last 60 years for the first time. And in this term, I will have an opportunity to work with you over the next 4 years, and it's a great pleasure to see the two coincide. And I can say from my past experience of working with you in your first term that we will continue to advance the India-US strategic partnership with the same warmth, with the same trust, and with the same excitement.
और मेरे लिए खुशी की बात है कि आते ही राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप ने एक मित्र की तरह मुझे पुराने अहमदाबाद के स्टेडियम की याद दिलाई। ये बात सही है कि ह्यूस्टन में हाउडी मोदी और गुजरात में अहमदाबाद में नमस्ते ट्रंप, वो दो एक ऐसी बहुत बड़े विशाल कार्यक्रम रहे जिसकी गूंज आज भी भारत के हर कोने में सुनाई दे रही है।
I'm happy that as soon as I entered this room, my friend reminded me of Ahmedabad and the cricket stadium where we held the big rally, and the events that we did, the mega events that we did in Ahmedabad, Namaste Trump, or the Howdy Modi in Houston. We had conveyed a very strong message of our friendship through those events, and the resounding echo of those events can be heard even today in India and the world.
भारत अमेरिका संबंधों को प्रगाढ़ बनाने में, उसको एक नई ऊंचाई देने में और व्यापकता देने में राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप की पहली टर्म की बहुत बड़ी भूमिका रही है, और मुझे विश्वास है कि दूसरे टर्म में भी उसी गति से आगे बढ़ेंगे।
Excellency, you made immense personal contribution towards strengthening of our relations, towards making them more comprehensive, and in attaining unprecedented heights in our relationship. And I firmly believe that in your second term, we will work with even more speed.
और मैंने जैसे भारत के नागरिकों को वादा किया है कि मैं तीसरे टर्म में पूर्ण गति से काम करूंगा, और मुझे विश्वास है कि राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप के साथ आने वाले 4 वर्ष हम भारत अमेरिका के संबंधों की गति में 2 गुना गति से काम करेंगे।
As I had promised to the people of India that in my 3rd term as the Prime Minister of India, we will work with thrice the speed. I firmly believe that with President Trump, during the next 4 years, during his 2nd term, we will work with twice the speed that we did in the 1st term.
मैं राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप से एक बात हमेशा अप्रिशिएट करता आया हूँ, सीखता आया हूँ कि वे राष्ट्रहित को सर्वोपरि रख करके काम करते हैं। राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप की तरह मुझे भी भारत के हितों को सर्वोपरि रखते हुए कार्य करना, ये मेरे लिए सौभाग्य की बात है।
One thing that I deeply appreciate and I learned from President Trump is that he keeps the national interest supreme, and like him, I also keep the national interest of India at the top of everything else, and this has been my real fortune.
राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप की जब भी बात आती है तब मेक अमेरिका ग्रेट अगेन हर किसी को याद आता है, हर किसी को उससे प्रेरणा मिलती है। वैसे ही भारत में विकसित भारत 2047, जब भारत की आज़ादी के 100 साल होंगे, तब तक भारत को विकसित बनाने के संकल्प के साथ 140 करोड़ देशवासियों का संकल्प, उसको आज नई गति मिल रही है, नई ऊर्जा मिल रही है।
President Donald Trump and Make America Great Again are inseparable. Whenever we talk about President Trump, one has to talk about Make America Great Again. Similarly, that vision inspires everybody. Similarly, in India, we have the resolve of 1.4 billion people of India that by the time India reaches the 100th anniversary of its independence, we will make our country a developed country by 2047. And this is getting new speed and new resolve.
अमेरिका विश्व का सबसे पुराना लोकतंत्र, भारत विशाल लोकतंत्र, और इसलिए हम दोनों का मिलने का मतलब 1+1 2 नहीं, 1 और 1 11 होता है, और ये 11 की तरती वो ताकत विश्व के कल्याण के भी काम आएगी।
US is the world's oldest democracy, and India is the world's largest democracy. So when India and the US come together, they make 1+1 11 and not 2. And this is the power of 11 that is going to work for the welfare of the humanity.
मैं राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप का, मेरे एक अच्छे मित्र का हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ कि हम फिर से एक बार प्रगति की राह पर नई ऊंचाइयों को छूने के लिए चल पड़ेंगे।
I once again thank my friend President Trump, and we together resolve that we will together march towards progress and towards prosperity for our nations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And he's doing a great job in India. Everybody talks about it. He's doing a really fantastic job. A great leader. Great leader.
मोदी जी बहुत अच्छा काम कर रहे हैं भारत में, और हर कोई इसी की बात कर रहे हैं कि वे बहुत बड़े नेता हैं, बहुत महान नेता हैं।
मैं आपका बहुत आभारी हूं आपके इन शब्दों के लिए, और मुझे विश्वास है कि भारत का हर नागरिक आपकी इस भावना का आदर करता है।
I thank you for your warm words, Mr. President, and I firmly believe that every person in India respects your sentiments.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thanks a lot.
Any questions, please?
Yes, President. You are both very popular leaders in your respective countries. You have spoken about a common sense diplomatic doctrine. So what's a Trump-Modi doctrine that we should expect from the meetings?
आप दोनों ही बहुत popular leaders हैं।
Make our words better and safer.
Well, I think more than anything else will be the unity. We have great unity. We have great friendship, he and I and our countries. And I think it's only going to get closer. But it's very important that we remain united as countries. We're friends, and we're going to stay that way.
President, how are you going to fight China if you're going to be tough with India on trade? How are you going to beat China then?
We're in very good shape to beat anybody we want, but we're not looking to beat anybody. We're looking to do a really good job. We've done a fantastic job for the American people. We had a great 4 years, and we were interrupted by terrible administration, absolutely terrible. They didn't know what they were doing, and now we're putting it back together, and I think it's going to end up being much stronger than it was before, even much stronger than it was before.
प्रधानमंत्री जी आप हमेशा से रूस युद्ध Yeah, President Trump, first of all, congratulations for the fantastic 24 days of your presidency. Historic and unprecedented decisions that you made, transformational reforms. I'm particularly impressed by the expose on USAID. And I would like you to share with us if you think USAID had a role in election interference in the US in 2020 and Indian elections in 2024.
So it could have had a role. There were a lot of bad things that happened in 2020. I think bad things happened in 2024, but it was too big to rig. We won by a tremendous margin. We won every swing state. We won the popular vote by millions of votes. So it was too big to rig. But yeah, I think they probably tried. We're looking to go to a system now much different, where one-day voting, voter ID, and we have to do that. And paper ballots. We want paper ballots. And when they do that, we're going to clean it up very, very well. But we had a great 2016. We had a much better 2020 election, but bad things happened. And we had the best of all. We had, they say, the most consequential in history, 129 years. Most consequential. So it was a great election, and it gives me a chance to work again with the Prime Minister and India. And we're going to have a great relationship together.
Mr. President, do you see, प्रधानमंत्री जी प्रधानमंत्री जी कल प्रेसिडेंट ट्रंप ने प्रेसिडेंट पुतिन से बात की है और युद्ध को रोकने की बात कही है. आप हमेशा से सर.
Do you see India playing a role in your plan to broker a peace in Ukraine? And if I could ask you about a development in your hometown today, the U.S. attorney has resigned over the DOJ's request to drop the case into Eric Adams. Did you personally request the Justice Department to drop that case?
No, I didn't. I know nothing about it. I did not. I think that, just to answer your other question, we're just going to get along well. We're going to get along with all countries. We're going to do very well. We're going to be doing, I think, record business, record numbers. And we're going to work with India also. We have some very big trade deals to announce in the very near future.
प्रधानमंत्री जी कल प्रेसिडेंट ट्रंप ने प्रेसिडेंट पुतिन से बात की है. आप दुनिया के अकेले ऐसे लीडर हैं जिन्होंने प्रेसिडेंट पुतिन से मीटिंग की है, प्रेसिडेंट जेलेंस्की से मीटिंग की है, पहले प्रेसिडेंट बाइडेन से मिले और अब प्रेसिडेंट ट्रंप से मिले. आपको लग रहा है कि जिस शांति की बात आप करते आए थे उसमें अब भारत रूस और यूक्रेन को युद्ध खत्म कराने के लिए अमेरिका के साथ मिलकर कोई नया रास्ता बना सकता है? और दूसरा, प्रेसिडेंट ट्रंप भारत आने वाले हैं, प्रेसिडेंट पुतिन भारत आने वाले हैं, तो क्या भारत भूमि से शांति का संदेश जा सकता है? And Mr. President, what you would like to say about the Bangladesh issue, because we saw and it is evident that how the deep state of United States was involved to regime change during the Biden administration. Then Muhammad Yunus made Junior Soros also. So what is your point of view about the Bangladesh?
And what is the role that the deep state played in the situation in Bangladesh?
Well, there was no role for our deep state. It was. This is something that the Prime Minister has been working on for a long time and has been worked on for hundreds of years, frankly. I've been reading about it. But I will leave Bangladesh to the Prime Minister.
जहाँ तक रूस और यूक्रेन के बीच का लड़ाई का सवाल है, मुझे खुशी है कि राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप ने शांति के प्रयासों का इनिशिएटिव लेते हुए कल राष्ट्रपति पुतिन से बात की है. दुनिया का एक सोच रही है कि भारत न्यूट्रल है. भारत न्यूट्रल नहीं है. भारत का अपना पक्ष है और भारत का पक्ष है शांति. हम पहले दिन से ही, और मैंने राष्ट्रपति पुतिन को उनकी मौजूदगी में मीडिया के सामने कहा था कि ये समय युद्ध का नहीं है, और मेरा एक कन्विक्शन है कि समस्याओं का समाधान युद्ध के मैदानों में नहीं निकलता है, वो टेबल पर चर्चा करके ही निकलता है.
As far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned, I'm very happy that President Trump has taken initiatives to restore peace and had telephone calls with President Putin and President Zelensky. The world had this thinking that India somehow is a neutral country in this whole process, but this is not true. India has a side, and that side is of peace. From the very first day, I have been talking about the importance of dialogue and diplomacy and a peaceful solution. And when I met President Putin in the presence of media, I had told him that this is not the era of war. And I have firm conviction that problems cannot be resolved on the battlefield. The two sides will have to come to the negotiating table.
शांति के हर प्रयास का हम समर्थन करते हैं और राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप ने जो इनिशिएटिव लिया है, मैं उनका हर सख्त समर्थन करता हूं।
We support all efforts aimed at establishing peace.
Can you let him translate, please?
Trump has taken, we welcome it and support it.
I just want to add to that. We had a very good phone call yesterday with President Putin. It lasted maybe an hour and a half. It was excellent, and I think we went a long way toward getting a solution to the horrible war where so many people are being killed, especially soldiers on the battlefield. At least 1.5 million soldiers have been killed on a ridiculous war that would have never happened if I were president. But we've got a long way to, I think we've got a long way to solving it. Tomorrow there's a meeting in Munich, and then next week there's a meeting in Saudi Arabia, not with myself or President Putin, but with top officials. And Ukraine will be a part of it too. And we're going to see if we can end that war. That war is a horrible war. It's a vicious, bloody war. We want to end it. To your other question, that U.S. attorney was actually fired. I don't know if he or she resigned, but that U.S. attorney was fired. Okay, go ahead.
What is the role, Prime Minister, I have a question. The US competition with China.
Say
what
it.
is the role that you expect India to play vis-a-vis US competition with China and in your broader vision for peace in the Middle East?
US or China के competition?
Well, I think we're doing very well in our competition with everybody. I think you're going to see a nation that really is going forward at a very rapid pace. Our economy is going to be fantastic. We're doing things to make it that way. We announced some very big elements today of success. I call it an element of success. Reciprocal tariffs, so that somebody charges us, we charge them the same amount, which has never been done in our country before. We've always been taken advantage of by other countries, and we allow that to happen foolishly, but we're not going to allow that any longer. So I think we're going to do very well. We've been doing they say the last 3 weeks was among the best 3 weeks ever for a start in a presidency. There's never been anything like it. And when you see what we've been able to do in 3 weeks, people are really amazed. Even the Prime Minister mentioned it. I think other countries are looking at it. But I just want to thank everybody for being here. This is a terrific man. We're going to make some wonderful trade deals for India and for the U.S. And thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Quickly, guys, come on, please. Quickly, out this way. Quickly, guys. Come on, quickly, out this way.
We keep looking for points of history. I can point to one which I know of for sure. First time US President is taking questions in Hindi, of course being translated, in the White House. It's never happened before. My colleagues are, of course, are all there from India, and interesting occurrence right there. Okay, let's pick up this conversation because that's what's been said. That's the part of the pleasantries. Now, some serious issues have been asked and addressed. The primary one, of course, there being the position taken on Ukraine, where the Indian Prime Minister has said, we do not have a neutral position on Ukraine. We have a strong position towards the path of peace. This is what I've told President Putin, that this is not a time for war, and any initiatives taken by Donald Trump in Saudi Arabia to bring about peace is something that India firmly supports. Let me pick up that thought. Ambassador Kapoor.
Well, India has been saying that from day one, that till all channels of communication are exhausted, till the entire, Charter 5 of the UN Charter is also respected in terms of diplomacy. One should not engage in war. It is very unfortunate that war has happened in Ukraine, and India will have an important role to play in the entire war there also, because India is a great, procurer of energy from Russia, which is, refined, where value is added. And then a lot of that oil goes to Europe, and a lot of it goes to America and other countries.
Okay, just hold your thought. Let me get response from everybody on this issue, because that's the substantially most important thing that was said in this interaction. This is, like I said, the more it is a press interaction. I won't call it an informal interaction, but this is not a joint press briefing. We are expecting a joint statement shortly. Whether it will be just a joint statement or a joint press briefing, I can't tell you yet. I'm being told it'll probably be a joint statement, but I'll let you know once we have information. Jordan, on the thought on Ukraine and Russia.
We'll see what ultimately happens. Of course, I didn't really hear any exact definitive solutions in terms of how the peace will emerge, what the conditions will be if a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine is signed. Does seem to be some support for the war ending, but the big ultimate question is, what are the borders going to look like? That's ultimately going to determine, one, if there's future war potentially, and on top of that, whether Ukraine will ultimately be satisfied, and I put satisfied in quotation marks, with the solution. So, of course, territorial boundaries continue around the world to be a constant motivator for war. It remains yet to be seen how those territorial boundaries will be defined.
Okay, all right. Adrian Calamil, on what we heard, the substantive part on Ukraine.
I pretty much have to echo what Jordan just said. I don't know how the peace is going to be obtained. I think Putin needs to be shown that this is a very costly endeavor that he's gone into. I think he needs to pay a bit of a price for this. He can never, and also needs to be shown that he can never invade another sovereign nation in Europe. I also think that the United States can play a part in removing some of that energy dependence that India finds itself on with Russia, vis-a-vis Russia. And that's kind of, again, looking at the Islamic Republic, Russia, and China in one bucket that coordinate together. So, it's complicated, but ultimately this war needs to end. It never needed to start. It shouldn't have started. I think through appeasement and through weakness, it invites bad things. So let's hope that there's an end to this, and that it's a favorable outcome for the Ukraine, and that country is able to rebuild.
All right, Ambassador Bansal, do we have a role to play? It would seem probably not. The Ukrainians and Russians will have to sit on the table together at some point of time, and the intermediating authority is probably going to be the Trump administration. So what you've heard the Indian Prime Minister say is, Donald Trump, go ahead with what we're doing, and if you need any support from us, you have it.
Is that for
General
me?
Bansal?
General Bansal.
Oh, yeah. It's a very tricky thing in the sense, because the terms and conditions put by Russia is very harsh, in the sense they say that yes, whatever area they are occupying, they will keep it. They will have the talk will be after the election. They are not going to talk to President the Zelensky. So in that condition, if there is a puppet government, and then there are further chances that he will invade, or the Russia will invade other countries. So there is the apprehension amongst other European countries. So it appears to be a very difficult thing, because so far the Zelensky is thinking that in lieu of Kursk, he wants his land back, maybe in the Donetsk and this all that area, including Crimea, which is not going to happen. So it is very, very difficult that yes, this thing will come to an end. But definitely, it is true that there has been about 1.5 million soldiers from both sides, and really it is not a good thing for the Russia also. Russia never thought that this war will go for 3 years. Now Russia, which is an arms exporter, is getting arms from the North Korea, from Iran, even China, and asking for the soldiers from all over the world.
Yes, so, but it is, let us not assume that that is not a conundrum. Of course, it's a major conundrum if you're sitting here in New Delhi. Yes, it is. That's just the factuality of life. We have a good association with the Americans, we have a good association with the Russians. But we primarily have to have a good association with ourselves. Let's be clear, that's how foreign policy works. There has to be a confluence of interests, and yes, India and America have a large confluence of interests. But does India have energy needs? Yes, so does Europe, which buys a lot of its oil and gas from Russia still. But there are issues here. Let me not ignore them. Dr. Sadhuru Nagao, let me get you back into this conversation. So, assuming we have taken a step forward, which is to say that we've got the pleasantries out of the way, we've got the immediate steps on the tariffs and the immigration out of the way. It now seems that the next port of call is going to be Ukraine. Do we see an end one way or the other?
Of course, there are many programs to stop Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But the view from the US-India relations, both of the US and India want to end this war. Because if Russia continues to invade Ukraine, there is a big problem between US and India. The Russian side, Ukrainian side, which side you are? This is a question, continues the question if Russia continues to invade Ukraine. So that is the reason this issue is US-India relation issue. So both India and the US want to end this.
Okay, all right.
So this means they are both of two countries are same side.
Okay, stay with me. Let me get Dr. Rao into this conversation. Dr. Rao, good morning to you. Let me have a larger picture conversation on this, because how long do you think it's going to take us to navigate which seem to be the immediate bilateral priorities? Is to just the Trump agenda is immigration, is it, and its tariffs. Do you think this meeting and maybe a little bit of follow up from the relevant ministers will be enough, and then we can move on to larger issues?
Yes. Good morning to all of you. Yes, I am quite optimistic that there will be progress on all these issues. If you have noticed that Modi has already sorted out progress with President Macron on issues that affect Indo-French relationship, and he has now gone on to this. I don't think tariff and immigration will be a huge problem, because there is quite a agreement between both sides even before Modi ji went to US, and I am sure that there will be major progress. India is now more concerned about the various technologies which India needs American help with, so that we can also progress in our development, both in armed forces and with the things like artificial intelligence and chip manufacturing. So I think there will be a lot of understanding on that. And please do note that after the illegal immigrants have been sent out of US is really in need of skilled labor. And just like Israel and Taiwan have started officially getting manpower from India, I'm sure this will work out with US.
Okay, so there are lots of threads to pick up, and we can go in lots of tangents. Let me get Adrian back into this conversation. Adrian, let me pitch this from a different perspective. From the American point of view, all right, when they're looking at the world and they're saying, all right, we've got China to deal with, we have a border issue with Mexico we want to deal with, we have a trade issue on which we want to figure out Panama and Greenland, we have problems in Europe that we need to sort out, we have Ukraine, and we have Gaza, we have Iran. Where does India figure into this? Because one would assume, other than on China, on Ukraine, on Gaza, India is not on the US consideration, is it?
Well, so we're looking at all different parts of the globe where there's a Chinese influence. There's an influence from, we're looking at flashpoints where there's it's being dictated by Beijing. It's being dictated by Moscow. It's being dictated by Tehran. And this is, again, if we're looking at a world order, I mean, they call themselves the axis of resistance. And if we want to look at a series of democratically aligned countries, I think it does become a bit of an India problem, where, you know, if Russia, if Putin feels enabled and compelled that he can go and invade Ukraine, then everybody was asking themselves after October 7th, when's Xi going to make his play on Taiwan? Okay, or are they going to try something with China? And I know with India, and I know it's happened before. Modi's a great diplomat. He understands, again, as I said before, he's in a dangerous neighborhood. But he's got to play the game a little more differently than the U.S., who is somewhat isolated from. I wouldn't say isolated, but you know, we're removed from this to a degree. He's in a difficult position. We need to do everything we can to pull them away from this group of, you know, this BRICS group, the Islamabad, those type of countries.
Yes, I can tell you on face value that 6-8 months ago, things were unpleasant in the last few months of the Biden presidency. Not to say that the entire Biden presidency was unpleasant. It certainly wasn't. A lot of things were, you know, there is a larger issue here that transcends, for sure, you know, issues that are coming up. So I'm putting that aside for a second. But there were issues, and that led to two big things closer to where I'm sitting. Number one, India and China ended their longest standing border standoff for the past 4 years, gun to gun, highest ever deployment on the India-Chinese border that I have seen the Indian armed forces put up. That ended, all right? And that happened because there were issues happening with the US. The secondary aspect was the BRICS meeting picked up pace, which is unpleasant if you're sitting in Washington, where we want to be friends of Washington and they want to be our friends. So you don't want to see that happening from that perspective onwards. So let me try to draw this together to where we are in the present moment, back to the present moment. Let me get Ambassador Kapoor back in. Ambassador Kapoor, let me pick up a different thread with you, because this question has been asked on Bangladesh, and it is a pretty cheeky question. Indian correspondent saying that the US deep state and George Soros Jr. were all involved in what happened in Bangladesh, and Donald Trump's response was, I leave Bangladesh to PM Modi. Now that could be, I leave it to him to talk about it, which is what I'm assuming it was, or it could be implied that I leave it to him to figure it out. Which do you think it was?
Well, I think for President Trump to make a statement that I will leave Bangladesh to Indian PM could have been either, but I would pitch for the latter, in the sense that the deep state in the US wanted to draw away Bangladesh completely from Indian influence. They wanted to disrupt the entire political scenario there. They succeeded in that. And now President Trump realizes that it's become a very big mess, and even for the US to sort out that mess is not going to be easy. So it may mean that he would rather draw upon India's strengths in the region to deal with the Bangladesh problem and to see how to bring it back to an even keel. It's not going to be easy, considering the way the fundamentalist forces and the jihadi forces have gained traction there, and the radicalization that has happened in the Muslim population of Bangladesh, which is very unfortunate for that country, in the sense that it was doing quite well economically, it was doing quite well politically, but suddenly everything has been thrown off the rails. So for any country to try to make an attempt to bring it back is not going to be easy. So US probably realizes that. US aid, incidentally, also I'm told, played an important role in that. About the other American actors who wanted, to get a piece of the Bangladeshi action in terms of getting an island of Bangladesh for a US base, etc. Lots of things transpired. The previous Prime Minister of Bangladesh did make some very revealing.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir, but we are being dictated to by live events as they are transpiring. I'm expecting a joint press conference or a reading of a joint statement to begin very, very shortly. So let me just get Ambassador Kapoor back in. Ambassador Kapoor, just back into the present moment. Now we are expecting that this is not going to be a damn squib. I think both sides want to set the agenda on a really positive note. And I think that conversation, as you well know, has already been had. They haven't decided what they'll be announcing in the last 10 minutes. They already knew what they were announcing. Maybe some spit and polish has been put in. But we can reasonably expect some things on defense, on tariff barriers, on Indian investments. Anything else that comes to your imagination, sir?
Well, I think there will be some, big announcements also of how the bilateral relationship is going to move ahead, how the bilateral relationship is going to impact the global stage, how the two countries are going to work together in the Indo-Pacific and in the other areas in terms of, jointly using their strengths to impact the world positively. So towards that end, some very practical sort of statements are going to be made by the two leaders. So you saw the chemistry was very good during this brief interaction that we saw on the screen just a few minutes back. The chemistry between the delegations has been very good because a lot of groundwork and a lot of spade work has happened in the preceding weeks. So all that will culminate in some good, sort of development, good progress, and some good announcements which are expected now.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, time passes by, right? I mean, my hair had gone grey. It seemed like yesterday I began this job, and then the millennium turned, and here we are a quarter way into this new century. It's already elapsed. So the next 4 years will also pass, and I promise you this. It's happening so fast that we're not comprehending it. As we speak, India has probably already overtaken Germany as the 4th largest GDP in the world. Okay, that just leaves the US, Japan, and China. Okay, and Japan is not too far off. US and China, of course, 3x or 4x further away. So these conversations, which were fundamentally important in New Delhi, all right. I remember when Obama was coming to India for the first time, and it was all we could talk about, right? Morning, evening, front pages, 24/7 live coverage. But when an Indian Prime Minister used to travel to the US, it would come on the 8th page that, an Indian PM was here. Not anymore. That's not only going to change, it has started changing. You remember even Joe Biden talking about how many people who wanted to show up to the White House reception that was being held for PM Modi. You've seen the Howdy Modi events and the New York events and all that, and that's just not the Indian diaspora. There's a overall general understanding that India and the US have to chart the course of the remaining 3/4 of a century together. We are living in that moment in history. So 4 years is a long time. So let me situate this right now in the American imagination, and not just the Trump administration imagination. In the American imagination, you're thinking, Ukraine, but what's India got to do with it, right? You're thinking Gaza, but what's India got to do with it, right? Panama, what's India got to do with it? So that's what you're thinking right now. But you've seen a gargantuan shift, and this is not just Trump, between the traditional all-weather alliance that transcended 2 world wars and the all of the previous century. The British Prime Minister was not there at the inaugural of the American president. One of the most virulent opposition leaders was in fact there. And this was supposed to be the special relationship which has been unbroken since the end of the Second World War. In fact, as Donald Trump and Narendra Modi were sitting, right behind Donald Trump was a bust of Winston Churchill. It's there in the White House, signifying that special relationship. So let me pick up that thought with Jordan Cope once again. Jordan, so I accept the fact that even in the American press tomorrow, this is going to be a footnote, right? This is not the biggest issue, it's not the biggest visit. Even in the press conferences, American journalists end up asking domestic policy questions of, for example, why has that particular Attorney General resigned? Because that's the bigger news point for them. Modi being there is not the biggest news point. But that's going to change, and 4 years is a long time.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I think the American psyche is not one that's so invested in foreign policy as much as it might be in much else of the rest of the world. If you looked at polling issues, one of the lowest voter agenda items was actually foreign policy. It wasn't the biggest role in this election, despite the fact that presidents ultimately determine what is the foreign policy of the United States, as does the federal branch of our government. So India also, though, if it wants to be a global leader, it needs to demonstrate global leading tendencies. And when I say that, I mean in the forefront of the halls of the United Nations, India often doesn't take very strong stances against the rest of the world, and it should definitely do so and exercise what it genuinely believes in. Of course, India is one of Israel's largest supporters behind the scenes, but when it comes to UN General Assembly resolutions, it doesn't necessarily take those strong stances out of fear of other political considerations. So, of course, India is rising in the ranks. Europe is definitely subsiding in terms of its place atop of the hierarchy in determining world order. And Americans need to pay better attention as to the role and the potential that India has. Americans are surely realizing it bit by bit. But India also at the same time needs to demonstrate leadership and strength when it comes to prioritizing its own foreign policy interests. And I would also argue separating itself from the actors that America doesn't necessarily get along with so well, including China and Russia.
So fair enough. Americans need to be interested about what's happening in America. We are told all news is local, so we here are, of course, more interested in what's happening down the road than what's happening 18,000 miles away. But for sure, there is a larger global picture. The world is smaller than ever before. It is getting smaller. Globalization has not ended. It's in fact expanding at a scope that we've not seen before. Adrian, let me bring you into this conversation because life as we knew it, and as students, studying international politics and history, it's been pretty much dominated by NATO and the Atlantic alliances between North America and Western Europe. I won't say that's over, we are a long way from that, but it has diminished. It's different today, and it's not just because of Donald Trump. You can smell it in the air that it's different. The global priorities are changing. So while India might not be on the top of the priority list for Americans, when do you think that sort of dawns that hey, hang a second, India is a bigger economy than Germany? When did that happen?
Yeah, this is something I've been shouting from the rooftops for quite some time. You have the United States over here, and Europe, the European Union, the UK. You talked about the special relationship. It's been in tatters for quite some time, and you're seeing a situation, at least from my perspective, where India is starting to play such a more pivotal role than Europe, which has been bogged down through the European Union. There's a lot of dysfunction within the European Union, corruption as well. It just hasn't functioned well, and India is the path for the future. I would like to get to the point where we have that special relationship with India, that we see the same threats at the same level. We may not view it as impacting us, but India does, so we should care about it, such as Bangladesh. And at the same time, Mexico may not be an issue for illegal immigration for Indians, but it is for Americans, and India has.
Okay, so let me pick up on that thread with Dr. Rao. Dr. Rao, I remember Ambassador Jaishankar making this point that Europe thinks all of Europe's problems are the world's problems, but all the world's problems are not Europe problems, unquote. Now, in the past 18 months, we've had economic collapse and political instability in Sri Lanka, which is a near neighbor. We've had literally a coup take place in Bangladesh. There's no running away from that. That's what happened in Bangladesh. It wasn't a liberation, it was a coup. They're burning down the houses of their founding fathers as we speak. We have perpetual slide down into chaos in Pakistan. We've had a lot of issues that have taken place politically in South Korea, where difficult things have happened. Is this then a concern for Europe, or is Europe only concerned with itself?
See, Rishabh, for my entire life, I have noticed that Europe continue to have a slight colonial mindset, where they felt that they can decide on behalf of the southern part of the world. And throughout many of those years, India was leading the so-called non-aligned, saying that we are on neither side of the Cold War. And this led to a lot of suspicion, where US was more interested in supporting Pakistan and other nations which were not necessarily 100% democracy. And our democratic strength, representing 1/6 the world's population, was not being given the importance that the world's oldest democracy should have been giving. I think it is only now they are realizing that India is a very powerful democratic force with a lot of influence in the so-called southern part of the world. That means nearly half the population of the world can be influenced by India, and that India can be an important partner. It is not just the economic force, it's not just the technological advances that we have made in space, in various other technologies, and the fact that many of the US companies are now being headed by people of Indian origin. I think they are now beginning to realize that far more important in geopolitics and in representing the rest of the world, India is very important.
So let me ask them the larger, loaded and difficult question. General Bansal, in a practical sense, if Europe is diminishing, and I'll use that word with measure, diminishing, and there cannot be any American special relationship with the Russians, at least in the near future, or with the Chinese in the near future, is it inevitable that the next global special relationship is between Washington and New Delhi, and are we desirous of one?
Very good question you have asked. Definitely the Europe is diminishing. You know, when after this Ukraine-Russia war, they were having the problem with the gas supply and all. And very good question has been asked that, you talked about the NATO earlier. So I would like to say one thing, the NATO was finished at the time when Americans, they withdraw from Afghanistan. At that time, France told President Macron said that NATO is the brain dead. It was just revived because of this Ukraine-Russia war, and now there is as far as the European countries are concerned, there is a conflict. The European countries are divided even on the Ukraine issue also. Some of them are favoring Russia and they are divided. Now there is a lot of crisis over there, economic crisis there, there's energy crisis there. It is definitely on the diminishing side. And one of the countries, that is France, is having good relations with India, and they realized that France has been supporter to us even during 1998 when we had this nuclear test. This were by our side. And now, as you have very rightly said, that relations between now the world is very practical now. The practical in the sense, President Trump says that yes, we must. Why should we spend for the money for security of Europe? Now, India is a power, economic power. It is coming up. It is a good market, and geopolitically it is well placed. Keeping everything in mind, there is the good relations which is going to further reaching to the further heights between US and India. And
the market difference that I've seen, and sitting here now many years later, I've done about 25,000 hours of television in what is actually a very short career, and watching this, and just as an observer, is how differently France approaches India than how the Germans, the British, the Canadians approach India. It's rather strange. And let me get Dr. Rao into this. Dr. Rao, we witness this real time because, let's take example, Stephen Sacker, a BBC journalist, roasting the former Chief Justice of India, attempting to put India's judicial system on trial in the last 24 hours. Okay. It's the British system that actually should be reasonably put on trial. We know what they've been up to for the last couple of 100 years. But in a practical sense, the French approach has been markedly different than what a Trudeau does, or let's face it, what the Germans have done or the British have done in the recent past?
Yes, I fully agree with you that interview with BBC interview with Chief Justice Chandrachud was very remarkable about how they continue to have a colonial mindset and they think that we are inferior in any way. The French have been very different from the rest of Europe. And if you remember, even till recently, the German foreign minister was busy promoting Pakistan and other nations and looking down upon India and giving us lectures on how to run a democracy. I think these things are changing. French, Israelis, and the Russians have actually been quite supportive of India and not been looking at India with a colonial mindset. Unlike the other nations that you mentioned, I think the realization is coming on all their minds that India is now quite powerful. It has got a lot of influence in a major part of the world, and we need to be treated as equals and not to be treated as something inferior. I think
I think in certain quarters the realization is totally absent. It just doesn't exist. It's the emperor's new clothes, right? You just don't want to see it because it's the truth is far more horrifying than living a lie. But yeah, that's the reality. The reality is this. We have a lot of problems here in India, ladies and gentlemen, but I have seen such remarkable change to witnesses as a person living here and who's had the privilege of having spent time and studied abroad, seen the world for what it has, and see the change that India is around me happening. It's quite remarkable. Glad to be around at this time to actually see it happen. It's truly remarkable. But putting that aside, the world doesn't necessarily run on hopes and dreams. It runs on reality, realpolitik. What is the situation at hand and what matters? Let me put that perspective into place. Dr. Sadhguru Nagao, all in good, right? India is rising very good. We knew that 5 years ago. It's a certainty 5 years from now. But what leverage does India have in other parts of the world? I have seen our diplomacy change. I've seen us give away free vaccines. I've seen us give away aid to places like Sri Lanka and others like never before. We have $700 billion in foreign exchange reserves. When I was in school, that was less than $100 billion. So things have changed. But what leverage does that actually give us?
When we talk about the potential of India, we should not only the power of India. We should not talk about only the India as a nation, because Indian people contribute in the global stage. For example, in the United States, or for example, the British, there are plenty of the Indian contribute the technological sector or related with law or the doctors. Everyone are Indian. So that's why, indeed, Indians are moving world. So in case of India's policy, India itself is rising just now, but potential of India is more greater, I think. So that's why how to connect Indian abroad and Indian in India is the key for rising India.
Okay, but Dr. Nagao, let me just for point of context, while waiting the press conference to start, a lot of naysayers will say that, okay, India is growing fine, world's fastest major economy, but that's 6.5–7%, right? The Chinese were doing 15–16% a year for 2 decades. That's what's actually required, and that's not happening in India. So can the Indian story be different?
Is it true?
Dr. Nagao.
Okay. Yes, of course. Currently, we check country-based country. These are the data. So GDP, the India's GDP, American GDP. But India contributes American GDP. India contributes UK GDP. This is really. For example, we talk about AI recently because of the big event. But who developed AI? Indian. Many Indian contributed. So when we check the resources, human resources, who can develop AI, Indeed, India's resource is number one in the world. So when we check the power of India, if the India connect the domestic power and global power, indeed India will be number one relatively easily. So that's why how to calculate India's potential, it is not easy to calculate, but indeed very big, and India has already been global number one in this case.
Okay.
But at the same time, how to connect is maybe policy matter. That is another problem.
Okay, all right. Okay, the joint statement is about to happen very shortly. Let me get General Bansal back into this conversation. Sir, in a very practical matter, what are we expecting in terms of announcements?
You know, in terms of the announcement, there will be a great progress towards the defense procurement. In the trade also, it will energy that yes, India will buy fuel from America, and of course immigration issue may be there, and there was something was going on that in the joint statement about the Khalistani and terrorism, whatever is going on around the world. So these are the main things which are going to surface, because you know basically trade, technology, and maybe this the artificial intelligence may be one of the things which will come out of it. So there are certain issues which will be very will be brought out in this particular joint statement, specifically concerning with the world order, terrorism, this Islamic Jihad. So these are the common issues which this US and India is facing. Back to you.
All right. What you're expecting is, of course, a very carefully crafted joint statement means that both sides agree upon it, which means that both the teams have sat down and gone through every word and every line very, very carefully, which will include what the Americans want focused on in the joint statement and what we as Indians want focused in the joint statement. Those will not always be the same. There's going to be a confluence of interest, but obviously the Trump priorities are, number one, can I come away from this and go back to the people in America and say, hey, when it came to tariffs, we got the Indians on the negotiating table and they've made way. When it came to investments into the US, we've got these many billions. It might be a defense deal. It might be, last time around, remember, it was aircraft, when Indian companies ordered 500 aircrafts globally, and imagine the thousands of jobs that safeguards or creates in the United States of America. So we've seen that happen. For sure, a defense deal is in the brooking here. You've just heard General Bansal mention energy. Everybody in the world right now is talking about AI. So now whether that will be a token entry into the books or whether something substantive will come out of this, technology transfer, big deal for India. Okay. Immigration and return of the illegal migrants, big deal for Trump. So you're going to see all of that conversation take place. There will be certain things the Americans will highlight more, certain things the Indian team will highlight more. For sure, you'll see a press conference, probably by the foreign ministers or foreign secretaries very, very shortly, where they'll be talking about what they felt this went. But let's be clear on what this is about. This is about us in India understanding that Donald Trump, in the first month of his presidency, has an agenda, okay, and we want to work with him. Therefore, there are issue points which we have to address in a pragmatic way. An association which is a happy association with America is better prospects for both America and India than an unhappy association. And I promise you, no matter how we spin it, not like the Biden administration had only pitfalls in the India-US relationship, that's not true. But no matter how you spin it, the last few months of the Biden administration saw certain actors in America directly assault India in ways which are unfathomable to people like us. Why would you want to be supporting Khalistanis openly in the US? It is akin to us in India supporting the Irish Republican Army, or us in India supporting the freedom of Quebec from Canada. It's ridiculous, but it happens, and it happened. George Soros is very open about regime change in India, and he was just given the US Presidential Medal of Freedom, their highest civilian honor. So let's not kid ourselves. There was a lot of unpleasantness. So for all those who will think, oh, oh, this is India bending over backwards, no. If India wanted to bend over backwards, we would have stopped buying oil from Russia. If India wanted to bend over backwards, we would have never bought oil from Iran. If India wanted to bend over backwards, we wouldn't have sorted out the issues which we've had on the border with China. India has to worry about itself first, its people first. It is in Indian interests to have a strong association with America and a strong association with Donald Trump. Now, having said that, while we're waiting for a press conference, let me get Dr. Rao back in. Dr. Rao, I'm going to circle back because thankfully these are issues of the past. I'm hoping that they remain issues of the past. But for some reason, the last 1 year was Justin Trudeau running rampant across global affairs, bearing cudgels, accusing the Indian administration of doing state-sponsored assassinations. I don't want to go into the Bay of Pigs and assassinations of Iranians and what happens in Abu Dhabi and other places, let alone what the Israeli state does. But this is what was being pictured. Khalistanis who want the Indian state to be broken into pieces, being openly feted in the UK, in Canada and even in the US. Indian consulates in San Francisco being attacked. Unpleasant things were happening as well, sir.
Yes, this is what I feel. It was in the larger sense when I said a colonial mindset. They felt that they were, if Indian leaders were not willing to listen to what they wanted, then they were quite justified in giving a different leadership to not only India, to many other countries, which they felt is superior to what existed, just because the existing leadership was not listening to them. And this is why not only the Khalistanis but various other such anti-India groups, both outside India and inside India, were being encouraged by them. And it is high time that this deep state, which is now being exposed after the US aid has been shut down, I hope the present new administration takes a better view about it, because everywhere where they have produced regime change, they have only caused a big mess up. They should be in pro-democracy. They call themselves the oldest democracy. They always claim to be a force for democracy. They should be able to identify and support true democracies.
Okay. All right.
That is what I feel. And one other point, I feel now is a time when India, which is dependent on various high-tech stuff from China, and that's why we have a trade deficit with China, I think we should switch that to import it from US, like many of the medical equipments and various other high-tech stuff.
Yeah,
and
tough one.
Thus,
tough one. Trust me, nobody really wants to be importing from China. Okay, but you got to give the devil its due. The Chinese are providing equipment which far exceeds the cost parity parameters that anybody else can do right now. Now, that doesn't mean it won't change. That doesn't mean the iPhones can't be built in India, because they are, okay. But there's also a truism that the chips that are put in those iPhones come from either Taiwan, the screens come from Korea, so they only get assembled here. So there's a reality to the world as well. But I'll tell you an example of hypocritical goat getting, okay. Donald Trump, until 6 months ago, was the principal leader of the opposition, how we would describe it in a parliamentary style of democracy, right? He was the tallest figure in the opposition party, and he had case after case after case after case at him. He was facing arrest, he was facing prosecution on all sorts of cases. Now, when in America the tallest opposition leader and a former president is facing cases, it's a democracy. But if in India an opposition leader faces cases, it's the crushing of democracy. It's hypocritical to the core. It's almost laughable. That it's like Justin Trudeau imposing an emergency in Canada, freezing the bank accounts of protesting truckers, then coming to India and talking about liberty and freedom of speech. This is the hypocritical nonsense that becomes way too much, and there's a problem there. But beyond that, there is a reality picture, and let me get that with General Bansal. General Bansal, okay, so if we assume that Donald Trump wants A, investments, B, the ability to talk about job creation in the US, C, big ticket defense deals and commercial deals, D, on immigration, maybe a little bit on AI, what do we want? I'm assuming number one is technology transfer and number two is the war on terror. Is there anything else?
Technology transfer is the main thing, and of course terrorism, and this specifically Khalistani issue. The Pannu who is sitting over there, and he is working against India. That kind of thing has to be ended. Moreover, of course, there is the technology transfer, specifically the high technology AI chips, etc. India will be expecting, and immigration and HB1 visa. That is also one of the issue. That yes, if the immigration, they are talking about the illegal immigration, which India is ready to take back, but at the same time, this HB1 visa has to be. There should not be any cut in that, because as such, the complete IT industry of US is based on the Indian workers who are working there. And if America does not do that, in that case, these days there are the proposal going on offshore working of operation, maybe in the same time zone in Canada or maybe Latin America, where the companies in the US will do in that manner. And as such, some of the work operation is being done from India itself for the US. So it is in the US interest to have the HB1 visa for the Indian people, so that they're...
Okay, so we have a clear cleaving of the two issues. Illegal immigration, fair enough, okay. If there are illegal immigrants who are being arrested as criminals in the US and they're being deported to their country of origin or citizenship, fair enough. But that should not have a bearing, prima facie, on legal immigration. That makes no sense for the United States to create a problem in the H1B visa system. It makes no sense for India to want to see the United States create a problem. So a cleaving of those two, bifurcation, a disaggregation of those two is required, for sure. Technology transfer, General Bansal, is the next thing, and I want to hold on to this thought with you for a second. Because we've never bought American frontline fighter jets, we might about to be, if not today, very shortly. And if that is the assumption, technology transfer is going to be core to that.
Yeah, because as it is in the interest of US to transfer technology.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir. The joint statement has begun. Let's go live.
Thank you very much, please. I'm thrilled to welcome the Prime Minister of India, my friend, Narendra Modi, back to the White House. We spent a lot of time here and a lot of time in India, and he's a very special man. Prime Minister, it is a pleasure to extend to you the same hospitality that you showed Melania and myself when we traveled to your beautiful country 5 years ago. It's hard to believe, so long ago. And it seemed like yesterday. It was beautiful. We opened the cricket stadium, 129,000 seats, I think the largest stadium in the world. Melania and myself when we traveled to your beautiful country 5 years ago. It's hard to believe, so long ago. And it seemed like yesterday. It was beautiful. We opened the cricket stadium, 129,000 seats, I think the largest stadium in the world. And it was an incredible period of time. There is truly a special bond between the United States and India, and the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy. And I believe the world's largest country in terms of the numbers of people. And today the Prime Minister and I are announcing a framework to strengthen those ties even further economically, and the U.S.-India Compact for the 21st century is a historic initiative that will deepen every aspect of our partnership and our friendship. Starting this year, we'll be increasing military sales to India by many billions of dollars. We're also paving the way to ultimately provide India with the F-35 stealth fighters. In 2017, my administration revived and reinvigorated the Quad security partnership. In our meeting today, the Prime Minister and I reaffirmed that strong cooperation among the United States, India, Australia, and Japan, and it's crucial really to maintaining peace and prosperity, tranquility, even in the Indo-Pacific. In addition, the United States and India will be working together like never before to confront the threat of radical Islamic terrorism, a threat all over the world, actually. Today, I'm pleased to announce that my administration has approved the extradition of one of the plotters and one of the very evil people of the world, and having to do with the horrific 2008 Mumbai terrorist attack, to face justice in India. So he's going to be going back to India to face justice. As we deepen our defense partnership, we'll also strengthen our economic ties and bring greater fairness and reciprocity to our trading relationship. As a signal of good faith, Prime Minister Modi recently announced the reductions to India's unfair, very strong tariffs that limit U.S. access into the Indian market very strongly, and really it's a big problem, I must say. India imposes and in some cases far more than that, and as an example, a 70% tariff on U.S. cars going into India, which makes it pretty much impossible to sell those cars. Today, the U.S. Trade deficit with India is almost $100 billion. And Prime Minister Modi and I have agreed that we'll begin negotiations to address the long-running disparities that should have been taken care of over the last 4 years, but they didn't do that, in the U.S.-India trading relationship, with the goal of signing an agreement. And we want, we want a certain level playing field, which we really think we're entitled to. And he does also, in fairness. So we're going to work on that very hard, and we can make up the difference very easily with the deficit, with the sale of oil and gas, LNG, of which we have more than anybody in the world. The Prime Minister and I also reached an important agreement on energy that will restore the United States as a leading supplier of oil and gas to India. It will be hopefully their #1 supplier, and the groundbreaking development for U.S. nuclear industry. India is also reforming its laws to welcome U.S. nuclear technology, which is at the highest level, into the Indian market. This will bring safe, clean, and affordable electricity to millions of Indians and tens of billions of dollars to the U.S. civilian nuclear industry in India. And under the framework we are announcing today, the United States and India are also joining forces to ensure that artificial intelligence and other advanced technologies are developed by two of the most advanced nations, intellectually and otherwise technologically. Anywhere in the world, there's nobody very much closer. We have an incredible relationship there, and this is where it seems to be heading. And artificial intelligence, a very complex subject, but it seems to be where people want to be and they want to go, and we're leading right now by a lot, but other people will try to catch us. I don't know if they're going to be able to. We're going to make it available. We're going to make tremendous amounts of electricity available. We're going to let the people that are buying the electricity make their own electric plants, electric generation plants. And we've never done this in our country, but we're going to get it done very quickly. Lee Zeldin and his group are going to get the approvals in very rapid form. And we're calling it a national emergency, and that's exactly what it is. So we're going to remain at the top of the AI, or artificial intelligence, I think, for a long time to come. And we're going to be working very closely with India and other countries on that. But right now, we're the leader by quite a bit. Finally, we agreed to work together to help build one of the greatest trade routes in all of history. It will run from India to Israel to Italy and onward to the United States, connecting our partners by ports, railways, and undersea cables, many, many undersea cables. It's a big development. It's a lot of money going to be spent, and we've already spent some, but we're going to be spending a lot more in order to stay advanced and stay the leader. I'm pleased to report that with today's announcements, The friendship between the United States and India is the strongest I believe it's ever been. I think our relationship is the best it's ever been between two leaders of the two countries, and it's an honor to say that. I'd like to now invite the Prime Minister to say a few words, and then we'll take some questions, and we appreciate you all being here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
योर एक्सेलेंसी राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप, दोनों देशों के डेलीगेट्स, मीडिया के साथियों, नमस्कार। सबसे पहले मैं मेरे प्रिय मित्र राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप को मेरे शानदार स्वागत और आतिथ्य सत्कार के लिए हार्दिक आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप ने भारत और अमेरिका संबंधों को अपने नेतृत्व से संजोया है, जीवंत बनाया है। जिस उत्साह से उनकी पहली टर्म में हमने मिलकर काम किया, वही उमंग, वही ऊर्जा और वही प्रतिबद्धता मैंने आज भी महसूस की है। आज की चर्चाओं में उनके पहले टर्म में हमारी उपलब्धियों का संतोष और गहरे आपसी विश्वास का सेतु था। साथ ही नए लक्ष्यों को प्राप्त करने का संकल्प भी था। हम मानते हैं कि भारत और अमेरिका का साथ और सहयोग एक बेहतर विश्व को शेप कर सकता है। फ्रेंड्स, अमेरिका के लोग राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप के मोटो मेक अमेरिका ग्रेट अगेन यानी मागा से परिचित है। भारत के लोग भी विरासत और विकास की पटरी पर विकसित भारत 2047 के दृढ़ संकल्प को लेकर तेज गति शक्ति से विकास की ओर अग्रसर है। अमेरिका की भाषा में कहूं तो विकसित भारत का मतलब मेक इंडिया ग्रेट अगेन यानी मिगा। जब अमेरिका और भारत साथ मिलकर काम करते हैं यानी मागा, मागा प्लस मिगा, तब बन जाता है मेगा पार्टनरशिप फॉर प्रॉस्पेरिटी। और यही मेगा स्पिरिट हमारे लक्ष्यों को नया स्केल और स्कोप देती है। फ्रेंड्स, आज हमने द्विपक्षीय व्यापार को 2030 तक 2 गुना से भी अधिक बढ़ाकर $500 बिलियन तक पहुंचाने का लक्ष्य निर्धारित किया है। हमारी टीमें एक पारस्परिक लाभकारी ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट को शीघ्र संपन्न करने पर काम करेगी। भारत की ऊर्जा सुरक्षा सुनिश्चित करने में हम ऑयल तथा गैस ट्रेड को बल देंगे। ऊर्जा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में निवेश भी बढ़ेगा। न्यूक्लियर एनर्जी क्षेत्र में हमने स्मॉल मॉड्यूलर रिएक्टर्स की दिशा में सहयोग बढ़ाने पर भी बात की। फ्रेंड्स, भारत की डिफेंस प्रिपेयर्डनेस में अमेरिका की महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका है। स्ट्रैटेजिक और ट्रस्टेड पार्टनर के नाते हम जॉइंट डेवलपमेंट, जॉइंट प्रोडक्शन और ट्रांसफर ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजी की दिशा में सक्रिय रूप से आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। आने वाले समय में भी नई टेक्नोलॉजी और इक्विपमेंट हमारी क्षमता बढ़ाएंगे। हमने ऑटोनोमस सिस्टम्स इंडस्ट्री अलायंस लॉन्च करने का निर्णय लिया है। अगले दशक के लिए डिफेंस कोऑपरेशन फ्रेमवर्क बनाया जाएगा। डिफेंस इंटरऑपरेबिलिटी, लॉजिस्टिक्स, रिपेयर और मेंटेनेंस भी इसके मुख्य भाग होंगे। फ्रेंड्स, 21वीं सदी टेक्नोलॉजी ड्रिवन सेंचुरी है। लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों में विश्वास रखने वाले देशों के बीच टेक्नोलॉजी क्षेत्र में करीबी सहयोग पूरी मानवता को नई दिशा, शक्ति और अवसर दे सकता है। भारत और अमेरिका आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस, सेमीकंडक्टर्स, क्वांटम, बायोटेक्नोलॉजी तथा टेक्नोलॉजीज में मिलकर काम करेंगे। आज हमने ट्रस्ट यानी ट्रांसफॉर्मिंग रिलेशनशिप यूटिलाइजिंग स्ट्रेटेजिक टेक्नोलॉजी, उस पर सहमति बनाई है। इसके अंतर्गत क्रिटिकल मिनरल, एडवांस मटेरियल और फार्मास्यूटिकल की मजबूत सप्लाई चेन्स बनाने पर बल दिया जाएगा। लिथियम और रेयर अर्थ जैसे स्ट्रेटेजिक मिनरल के लिए रिकवरी और प्रोसेसिंग इनिशिएटिव्स लॉन्च करने का भी निर्णय लिया है। स्पेस के क्षेत्र में अमेरिका से हमारा करीबी सहयोग रहा है। इसरो और नासा के आपसी सहयोग से बनाई निसार सैटेलाइट शीघ्र ही भारतीय लॉन्च व्हीकल पर अंतरिक्ष की उड़ान भरेगी। फ्रेंड्स, भारत और अमेरिका की साझेदारी लोकतंत्र और लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों तथा व्यवस्थाओं को सशक्त बनाती है। इंडो पैसिफिक में शांति, स्थिरता और समृद्धि को बढ़ाने के लिए हम मिलकर काम करेंगे। इसमें क्वाड की विशेष भूमिका होगी। इस वक्त भारत में होने जा रही क्वाड समिट में हम पार्टनर देशों के साथ नए क्षेत्रों में सहयोग बढ़ाएंगे। आईमेट और I2U2 के तहत हम इकोनॉमिक कॉरिडोर और कनेक्टिविटी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पर मिलकर काम करेंगे। आतंकवाद के खिलाफ लड़ाई में भारत और अमेरिका दृढ़ता से साथ खड़े रहे हैं। हम सहमत हैं कि सीमा पार आतंकवाद के उन्मूलन के लिए ठोस कार्रवाई आगे आता। उस मुजरिम को अब भारत के हवाले करने का निर्णय किया है। भारत की अदालतें उचित कार्रवाई करेंगी। फ्रेंड्स, अमेरिका में रहने वाला भारतीय समुदाय हमारे संबंधों की महत्वपूर्ण कड़ी है। हमारे पीपल टू पीपल टाइज को और गहरा करने के लिए हम शीघ्र ही लॉस एंजलिस और बोस्टन में भारत के नए कॉन्सुलेट खोलेंगे। हमने अमेरिका की यूनिवर्सिटीज और शिक्षा संस्थानों को भारत में ऑफशोर कैंपस खोलने के लिए निमंत्रण दिया है। राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप आपकी मित्रता और भारत के लिए दृढ़ प्रतिबद्धता के लिए मैं आपका आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। भारत के लोग तो 2020 की आपकी यात्रा को आज भी याद करते हैं और उम्मीद करते हैं कि राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप एक बार फिर उनके पास आएंगे। 140 करोड़ भारतवासियों की ओर से मैं आपको भारत आने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Okay, thank you very much. That was excellent. We'll do a few questions, please. Please, go ahead. Please, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Blue shirt.
Thank you, Mr. President. People in India will naturally welcome your decision to extradite Thakur Rana to India back home. In that context, I would like to ask you a question about, in last few years, we have seen several groups in the U.S. raising anti-India voice, calling about separation, terrorism activities in India. Do you think that should continue here in the U.S. as well?
You're going to have to go louder.
Mr. President, people in India would be welcoming your decision to extradite Thakur Rana to...
I can't understand a word he's saying. It's not it's the accent. It's a little bit tough for me to hear that.
Can I try again?
How about you, please? Go ahead back there.
Mr. President, thank you. First, I want to ask
Thank you very much.
question. You and the President, you both spoke about combating ISIS. You both sounded very excited about this partnership upcoming. And I was curious, how much more confident are you with President Trump leading this country that there will be peace through strength and you will have a successful partnership with the United States versus with Biden's incompetence and weakness over the last 4 years?
That's your question, but I'll answer it. I agree with you. Yeah, gross incompetence. We're going to have a fantastic relationship, and it has been. Look, the whole world's been set back over the last 4 years by the weakness of the United States, the weak leadership of the United States. But I think we've taken care of it in just 3 weeks. It seems to me that even some of the media that we wouldn't prefer has been writing that this is a much different country right now, that the world has a light over it. Not only our country, but the whole world. The Prime Minister told me that before, too, even over India. The world has a light. They need the United States to be strong and powerful, but good. And I think that's happened, and I think it's happened in a very short period of time. But I will tell you, we're going to have a fantastic relationship, and it'll make both countries much stronger. Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, Geeta Mohan from India Today, sir. I'll just take my colleague Lalit Jha's question forward because you couldn't understand.
Okay, fine.
The question is about the fact that you've decided to extradite Thakur Rana. Thank you so much. India has been waiting to have him back in India to bring him to justice. But there are many other elements in the United States of America, particularly Khalistani separatists who've been working against Indian interests. How is the United States of America going to cooperate on that front with India? There have been allegations that have been leveled against Indian agencies by the Biden administration. Are you going to relook that with Tulsi Gabbard as DNI now?
Well, I don't think India had a very good relationship with the Biden administration. Biden, they wouldn't sell them oil and gas, which is rather hard to believe because, you know, it's a good thing to do. And a lot of things happened that weren't very appropriate, I thought, between India and the administration, the Biden administration. But as you said, we're giving a very violent man, it seems to me. I mean, I don't know that he's been convicted yet or will be, but let's assume he's a pretty violent person. We're giving him back to India immediately. And there are more to follow because we have quite a few requests. So we work with India on crime. And we want to make it good for India, and it's very important. So that kind of a relationship is very important to us. Okay? Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. President, you've repeatedly called India a big abuser of trade and said it is really difficult to do business in India because of tariffs. You announced reciprocal tariffs today. I am hoping you can speak about what kind of reciprocal tariffs India can expect. Are you willing to make any concessions? And how can India head off these tariffs? I also have one for the Prime Minister.
Well, India's been, to us, just about the highest tariffed nation anywhere in the world. They've been very strong on tariffs, and I don't blame them necessarily, but it's a different way of doing business. It's very hard to sell into India because they have trade barriers, very strong tariffs. We are right now a reciprocal nation. We are going to, if it's India or if it's somebody else with low tariffs, we're going to have the same. We're going to have whatever India charges, we're charging them. Whatever another country charges, we're charging them. So it's called reciprocal, which I think is a very fair way. We didn't have that. I was going to do that in my other term, and we had the greatest economy ever in the world. There's never been an economy like we had, and then we got hit with COVID. We had to focus on that, and I wasn't really in the mood to be putting it on Italy and Spain and France and India, frankly, and a lot of other countries, because the world was very troubled until we got rid of that nightmare. But we had the strongest economy anywhere in the world during that fairly long period of time during my first term, as you know, and we didn't do the tariffs. We would have done the reciprocal tariffs, but we decided, and I decided, I think on a human basis, on a humane basis, not to do them because of the fact that there was such suffering all over the world. The last thing we needed to talk about is trade problems. But now we do. We're doing, we see a tremendous future for our country, but we felt that now it's finally time, after 45 or 50 years of abuse, that we will do, and this isn't India, this is among a lot of nations. The European Union is very difficult for us, very, very difficult. They tax our companies at levels that nobody's ever seen before. They take advantage of a lot of things, so we're not happy about that. China, of course, is terrible, and we've never taken in 10 cents until I was president. We've taken in hundreds of billions of dollars from China since I've been president in first term and now. And we have to do that just as a mechanism of fairness. And that's what I've done. And so we are being reciprocal with India. Whatever India charges, we charge them. So frankly, it no longer matters to us that much what they charge, because whatever they charge, I had discussions with India in the first term about the fact that their tariffs were very high, and I was unable to get a concession. So we're just going to do it the easy way, and we're just going to say whatever you charge, we charge. And I think that's fair for the people of the United States, and I think it's actually fair for India. Okay?
Are you willing to make any concessions, sir? Any concessions?
Go ahead, please. Ask to the
A
Prime
question
Minister,
for the
please.
Prime Minister, please.
Ask to the Prime Minister, please.
Yes. Sorry. Yoshita Singh with Press Trust of India. Thank you, Mr. President. Prime Minister, the US is giving a lot of push to curb illegal immigration, and India has been cooperating on this issue. How does India see this issue in the larger context? Thank you.
सवाल सिर्फ भारत का नहीं है, वैश्विक रूप से हम इस मत के हैं कि गैर कानूनी तरीके से जो लोग दूसरे देशों में होते हैं उनको वहां रहने का कोई कानूनी अधिकार तो है नहीं। जहां तक भारत और अमेरिका का सवाल है, हमने हमेशा कहा है कि जो वेरीफाइड होगा, कि जो सच्चे अर्थ में भारत का ही नागरिक होगा, वो अगर अमेरिका में गैर कानूनी तरीके से रहता है तो उसको वापस लेने के लिए भारत तैयार है। लेकिन बात हमारे लिए वहां से रुकती नहीं है। ये सामान्य परिवारों के बच्चे होते हैं, उनको बड़े बड़े सपने दिखाए जाते हैं और उनको ज्यादातर ऐसे होते हैं उनको गुमराह करके लाया जाता है, और इसलिए ये ह्यूमन ट्रैफिकिंग में जुड़े हुए पूरे इकोसिस्टम पर हमने वार करना चाहिए। और अमेरिका और भारत मिल करके हमारी कोशिश है और हमारी कोशिश रहनी चाहिए कि इस प्रकार की पूरी इकोसिस्टम को हमें जड़ मूल से नष्ट करना चाहिए ताकि ह्यूमन ट्रैफिकिंग बंद हो और गरीब लोगों को जो अपनी धन दौलत बेच करके ऐसे बड़े बड़े सपने दिखा करके उनको अंधेरे में रख करके ले जाया जाए, उनके साथ भी अन्याय है। और इसलिए हमारी बड़ी लड़ाई उस पूरे इकोसिस्टम के खिलाफ है और मुझे विश्वास है कि राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप भी इस इकोसिस्टम को खत्म करने में भारत का पूरा सहयोग करेंगे।
Thank you, Mr. President. A question for the Prime Minister Modi first, if I may. I wanted to ask you, did you discuss any possible business deals with Elon Musk during your meetings today, Mr. Prime Minister? And Mr. President, I wanted to ask you, today you spoke about hoping to have three-way talks with President Xi and President Putin. What would you say to European leaders and other allies who may be concerned that you're apparently more keen to speak to America's adversaries than to its allies? Thank you.
Well, maybe I'll just go in first on this one. We had some talks, and we told the European Union, we told the NATO people, largely they overlap, you have to pay more money because it's unfair what we're doing. We're doing a tremendous amount more. We're probably $200 billion more going into Ukraine, using for Ukraine to fight. And Europe has not really carried its weight in terms of the money. It's not equitable. And we want to see a counterbalance. We want to have them put up more money. They have to do that. At the same time, we had a very good conversation with President Putin yesterday, and we also had a very good conversation. I did in both cases with President Zelensky, and I think we're going to be able to do something. I think we're going to be able to make a deal, and I hope so, because it's a horrible war. It's a very terrible, bloody war with 1.5 million soldiers at least already dead on the battlefield, lying all over the fields like nobody's ever seen anything like it certainly since the Second World War. And so I think we're going to be able to do something. We're working with President Zelensky and with President Putin, and my impression is that I know that President Zelensky wants to make a deal, and I also feel that I know that President Putin wants to make a deal. I wanted to know that before I began any detailed discussions, but the meeting and the conversation, also the meeting with Steve Witkoff in Moscow, was a very successful one, and my phone call with him was a very successful one. Please.
ऐसा है कि आपने एलोन मस्क के लिए पूछा है। देखिए, मेरा उनका बहुत पुराना परिचय रहा है। मैं प्रधानमंत्री भी नहीं था जब मैं मुख्यमंत्री था, तब से मेरा उनका परिचय है। और आज वो एक पूरे परिवार के साथ, बच्चों के साथ मिलने के लिए आए थे, और स्वाभाविक है कि एक पारिवारिक वातावरण में उनके साथ मेरी गपगोष्ठी हुई है। जहां तक डील का सवाल है, आपने जो प्रश्न पूछा है, मैं समझता हूं पूरी दुनिया में डील शब्द का कॉपीराइट एक ही व्यक्ति का है, और उस व्यक्ति का नाम है ट्रंप।
That was very nice. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I ask whether you discussed at all today the case of Gautam Adani, who's one of the wealthiest men in Asia and perceived as an ally of Prime Minister Modi? Prime Minister Modi, have you asked the President to take action on that case? Thank you.
पहली बात है, भारत एक लोकतांत्रिक देश है और हमारे संस्कार, हमारी संस्कृति वसुधैव कुटुंबकम की है। हम पूरे विश्व को अपना एक परिवार मानते हैं। हर भारतीय को मैं अपना मानता हूं। दूसरी बात है, ऐसे व्यक्तिगत मामलों के लिए दो देश के मुखिया न मिलते हैं, न बैठते हैं, न बात करते हैं।
Go ahead, please. Yeah, please. Sir, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I have a question for you as well. But, Mr. President, you have suggested, with regards to the Russia-Ukraine war, you've suggested several things that Ukraine should give up. The idea of NATO membership, territory that was seized back in 2014 by Russia. What should Russia give up?
Russia has gotten themselves into something that I think they wish they didn't. If I were president, it would not have happened. Absolutely would not have happened. And it didn't happen for 4 years. If you look at what has taken place under President Bush, they lost a lot. Under President Obama, they lost Crimea. Under Biden, it looks like they could lose the whole thing. Under Trump, they lost nothing. Ukraine lost nothing. They didn't give up anything. And you take a look at the other three presidents surrounding me, they gave up a lot. I think that when you look at Ukraine and when you look at the mess that they're in, it's got to be ended and it's got to be stopped. Now, Russia's taken over a pretty big chunk of territory, and they also have said from day one, long before President Putin, they've said they cannot have Ukraine be in NATO. They said that very strongly. I actually think that that was the thing that caused the start of the war, and Biden said it, and Zelensky said it, and I think that was one of the reasons, one of the starts of the war. But from long before Putin, they said you cannot have Ukraine going in any way into NATO. And I start from that standpoint. I think everybody knew that. Now, if a better deal can be negotiated, if they are able to make a deal where they can do that, that's fine with me. I really don't care. I want that bloodshed to stop. I don't want to see, we have an ocean between us and the site we're talking about, the site of death. We're calling it the fields of death. We have a big ocean in between us. This is more important for Europe. We shouldn't be in. They have to equalize, and they're going to have to do it fast, but they have to equalize. But as far as the negotiation, it's too early to say what's going to happen. Maybe Russia will give up a lot. Maybe they won't. And it's all dependent on what is going to happen. The negotiation really hasn't started. But I will say, as far as NATO is concerned, from many years before President Putin, I will tell you that I've heard that Russia would never accept that. And I think Ukraine knew that, because Ukraine wasn't in and never requested to be in until more recently. So that's the way it is, and I think that's the way it's going to have to be. Go ahead, please. All right, go ahead, please, with the tie. With the tie, yeah.
Mr. President,
yes, go ahead, please.
This is Saurabh Shukla from News Mobile. Mr. President, you spoke about Prime Minister Modi as a tough negotiator. Who was a tougher negotiator today, and who has a better negotiating tactic when it comes to tariffs?
Oh, he's a much tougher negotiator than me, and he's a much better than me. There's not even a contest. Okay? Yeah, go ahead, please. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Reena Bhardwaj from ANI. How do you see this relationship between India and the United States to counter China? And what is your vision when it comes to India, in the Ukraine and Russia conflict?
Well, I think we're going to have a very good relationship with China. I got along with President Xi very well until COVID. That was a bridge too far. But until then, I got along with President Xi very, very well. We were very close as leaders go. I don't want to be naive, but as leaders go, I think we were very close. And I think that China is a very important player in the war. Let's get this war over with Ukraine and Russia. And I look at India, I do see the skirmishes on the border, which are quite vicious, and I guess they continue to go on. If I could be of help, I'd love to help, because that should be stopped. That's been going on for a long time. And it's quite violent. It's quite violent. But I would hope that China and India and Russia and all of us can get along. It's very important. The power of weaponry today is, and not only nuclear, but nuclear in particular, the power of weaponry is very important. I said before that I had very constructive talks in my first term with President Putin about the denuclearization of the two countries, and then we were going to go to China after we worked some kind of a deal. And we had the confines of a deal. He really wanted to do it, so did I, denuclearize, and it's such a beautiful term when you think about it. In other words, to bring it down, because the power of those weapons is too great. And I did speak to President Xi about that, and I was getting also a very good response. He's building a very strong nuclear power. He's not very close to Russia or the United States right now, but he will be soon. I mean, he'll catch up over the period of 4 or 5 years, they say. But it would be a great thing if we could, on a military basis. We're going to spend this year $915 billion on military. Russia, without the war, was spending close to 100, but with the war, I can't tell you what they're spending, but they're spending a lot. And China is spending $400 and $450 billion. We're over $900 billion. And I said, it doesn't really make sense, does it? We're spending the money against each other, and we could spend that money for better purpose if we got along. And I'll tell you, I think that something like that will happen. First, when I left, as you know, 4 years ago, we didn't have Israel and the Middle East. We didn't have October 7th, a disaster, the disaster. Nothing was happening. Iran was not going to do anything because Iran did not have much money at that point. They were broke. They were totally broke. They didn't have money for Hamas or for Hezbollah. And you didn't have Russia with Ukraine, and that would never have happened. But now I come back and the whole world is on fire, so I have to put out the fires. But after I put out the fires, I'm going to meet with China and I'm going to meet with Russia, and we're going to see if we can de-escalate it. We can bring it down military, especially as it pertains to nuclear. Please.
अगर आप माइक लेकर के कुछ बात करें तो
प्रधानमंत्री जी, आप इंडिया का रोल कैसे देखते हैं? आपने बातचीत की है प्रेसिडेंट ट्रम्प से टू डी एस्केलेट द कॉन्फ्लिक्ट इन रशिया एंड यूक्रेन.
आप जानते हैं, मैं रशिया और यूक्रेन दोनों से लगातार संपर्क में रहा हूं. मैं स्वयं भी दोनों देश की मुलाकात कर चुका हूं. बहुत से लोगों का एक भ्रम है कि भारत न्यूट्रल है. मैं साफ करना चाहता हूं, भारत न्यूट्रल नहीं है. हमारा अपना एक पक्ष है, और हमारा पक्ष है शांति, पीस. और मैंने इसी एक हमारे सिद्धांत को लेकर के राष्ट्रपति पुतिन की हाजिरी में मीडिया के सामने स्पष्ट रूप से कहा था कि युद्ध का समय नहीं है. और आज भी मेरा कन्विक्शन है कि युद्ध के मैदान में समस्याओं के समाधान नहीं निकलते हैं, अल्टीमेटली वार्ता के टेबल पर ही होते हैं. और भारत का लगातार प्रयास रहा है कि दोनों लोग जिसमें मौजूद हो वैसे फोरम में बातचीत होगी, तब कोई रास्ता निकलेगा. राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप जो प्रयास कर रहे हैं, मैं उनका स्वागत करता हूं, समर्थन करता हूं, और मैं चाहता हूं कि राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप हो सके उतना जल्दी सफल हो, ताकि दुनिया में शांति के रास्ते खुले.
Everybody, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I very much appreciate the Prime Minister visiting our great country, and I do really appreciate it. We have so much in common, and all we want to do is have peace, and we want to have strength, and we want to have lots of different things together. But the relationship with India and with the Prime Minister has never been better. Thank you very much.
This budget has given us a very good allocation of 2,52,000 crore.
मिडिल क्लास को तो टैक्स मुक्ति कर दी.
Biggest relief as far as income tax concession is concerned.
A very major bonanza for the middle class.
State governments are now being offered 1.5 lakh crore of interest-free loans.
You're bringing in a new income tax bill, which is wonderful, and we're looking forward to that. The biggest boost this budget has given is perhaps to the middle class.
More important is the implementation, the serious implementation on ground now.
It's a well-rounded budget, while the social sector and growth being the major focus.
From the banks of the holy Ganga, where millions gather in devotion. A spectacle of spirituality once every 12 years. We delve into the heart of the Mahakumbh Mela.
Hi, I am Arzu Seth reporting from Kumbh in Prayagraj, the world's largest public gathering and collective act of faith.
Watch the rituals, the celebrations, the profound devotion. Real-time updates.
This is the first time when the robotic fire tenders will be used.
In-depth reports.
Thousands of police personnel are also sitting here taking the instructions that what needs to be done.
An expert analysis.
We are in the war room where the preparations are being checked.
Only on NewsX.
This budget has given us a very good allocation of 2,52,000 crore.
Middle class को तो tax मुक्ति कर दिया.
Biggest relief as far as income tax concession is concerned.
A very major bonanza for the middle class.
State governments are now being offered 1.5 lakh crore of interest-free loans.
You're bringing in a new income tax bill, which is wonderful, and we're looking forward to that. The biggest boost this budget has given is perhaps to the middle class.
More important is the implementation, the serious implementation on ground now.
It's a well-rounded budget, while the social sector and growth being the major focus.
From the banks of the holy Ganga, where millions gather in devotion. A spectacle of spirituality once every 12 years. We delve into the heart of the Mahakumbh Mela.
Hi, I am Arzu Seth reporting from Kumbh in Prayagraj, the world's largest public gathering and collective act of faith.
Watch the rituals, the celebrations, the profound devotion. Real-time updates.
This is the first time when the robotic fire tenders will be used.
In-depth reports.
Thousands of police personnel are also sitting here taking the instructions that what needs to be done.
An expert analysis.
We are in the war room where the preparations are being checked.
Only on NewsX.
This budget has given us a very good allocation of 2,52,000 crore.
Middle class को तो tax मुक्ति कर दिया.
Biggest relief as far as income tax concession is concerned.
A very major bonanza for the middle class.
State governments are now being offered 1.5 lakh crore of interest-free loans.
You're bringing in a new income tax bill, which is wonderful, and we're looking forward to that. The biggest boost this budget has given is perhaps to the middle class.
More important is the implementation, the serious implementation on ground now.
It's a well-rounded budget, while the social sector and growth being the major focus.
From the banks of the holy Ganga, where millions gather in devotion. A spectacle of spirituality once every 12 years. We delve into the heart of the Mahakumbh Mela.
Hi, I am Arzu Seth reporting from Kumbh in Prayagraj, the world's largest public gathering and collective act of faith.
Watch the rituals, the celebrations, the profound devotion. Real-time updates.
This is the first time when the robotic fire tenders will be used.
In-depth reports.
Thousands of police personnel are also sitting here taking the instructions that what needs to be done.
An expert analysis.
We are in the war room where the preparations are being checked.
Only on NewsX.
This budget has given us a very good allocation of 2,52,000 crore.
Middle class को तो tax मुक्ति कर दिया.
Biggest relief as far as income tax concession is concerned.
A very major bonanza for the middle class.
State governments are now being offered 1.5 lakh crore of interest-free loans.